Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite time of the week. It's that time where the fourth dimension in entertainment starts. Today we have our very special lead host, Liam Max Better. In the co-host seat today, we have Liam Max Decent. Special guest host coming all the way from Florida. We have Steven Vaughn. And as always, your producer for the evening. Not as always, but today, it's me. It's Greg Prinz, the owner, the operator, Chapter 1 Films. Shout out. We got a great show for you guys.
Greg, the creative one.
Hey guys, Liam Maxwell here. You guys ever notice how Greg always gives himself like 10 more air horns than everyone else?
I've noticed that.
If you ask me.
I'm offended.
Liam, I have noticed that. It's funny you point that out. You always have such good and astute observations.
I just want to get this out of the way. I thought that live action Pinocchio just pretty much improved in every single possible way on the original, which of course I thought was a masterpiece. So it was like a double masterpiece. But yeah, and I just want to say, I found you, faker.
It's like the Spider-Man meme.
Oh my gosh!
It was Nathanael.
Me the whole time. It was Nathanael.
I'm keeping this around, by the way.
Yeah, I'm back again.
Hey, it's Liam Max Decent.
I'm back
Liam
again.
Max
Liam Max
poorly.
It's all right.
I know all my fans were disappointed in my treatment last week, so I'm happy to report.
Wait, hold on.
back.
The best time to throw someone under the bus is when they're not physically present. Everyone knows this.
Wait, hold on. I think for the fans' sake, you need to explain what it is you were doing that was more important than this show, because I think they deserve to know.
I heard you were just like really craving Taco Bell. I just had to get you.
I had a meeting with some high ups, some board members of the 4D podcast. I had to kind of handle the business stuff. That's typically what I do here. We have the talent, and I
It was just him looking in a mirror, like, okay, how do we want to spend the budget,
I'm
Liam?
the businessman.
He just had this
of this
All right,
operation.
So, what do you think, Liam?
Well, I think we should give all the money to Liam.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
I tuned
All
in
the
for
money.
like 5 seconds in the podcast that I wasn't on, and I was the 5 seconds where you're like, you know what I've been thinking recently? Liam's an idiot. That's like the 5 seconds I saw.
It was like way more fun than I thought it would be, because I was like, me and Nathanael got in here like desperately trying to find another person, and we couldn't. And I was just like, I just printed out a picture of your face and I put a volleyball.
It was good.
Excuse me, the volleyball was my idea. I was the one who said print a picture out of Liam. Thank you very much, Mr. Creative.
That was a good bit.
All right, so today
It was kind of a desperation, like, what do we do? Because we asked like 3 or 4 people, and they're all just like, nope, can't do it.
Yeah, it worked out.
Oh
How many did you miss? Just one?
Just one. I missed one.
And it's
that's
unacceptable.
all it takes.
Tough
for us.
crowd, dude.
And every time I miss,
like, dude,
You will
this guy-
never
every
get
time I
the
miss,
perfect attendance
people
star.
seem to think that the podcast does better, which is kind of interesting.
It's like triple the viewers that week.
It just blows up.
So today we're actually not talking about Liam Maxwell, contrary to what he might think. We're talking about something else, and there is definitely, this was a rough week, I think, for everybody, honestly. Like all the texts back and forth about the movies we were watching this week were really sad.
Man, it was,
So Nathanael, why don't you bring the people up to speed? What are we doing today? What are we talking about?
We're talking about Pinocchio. We watched the OG.
Pinot Grigio, if you will.
Pinocchio. We also watched the live action one, not the Guillermo del Toro stop action one, which by all accounts is a good movie.
That's what I hear. Actually.
That was not the one we watched. The one we watched was, how do you say, not a good movie.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
We might not all agree.
We might not agree on why.
Steven actually has some really rash takes. I'm looking forward to hearing what he has
We're
to
gonna
say.
see. We're gonna see. We can get into the hot takes in a second, but I don't think any of us enjoyed our time with the live action. I think is that fair to say?
I said it was an affront to God.
That is the yeah.
And Greg had to Google what a front was, to be fair. Bro, what the hell is he talking
Well,
about?
it's different from a back.
Liam's really smart, so
Yeah, I use big words on this podcast.
It's like, come on, dude. Communication majors.
But yeah, shall we jump into it?
Let's do it.
yeah. So okay, why don't you start? Like, so
Yeah,
tell
let
the
me give you
people,
the-
give us a
I'll
synopsis
give you
of
the synopsis of
original
the OG Pinocchio.
OG Pinocchio.
OG Pinocchio opens with Geppetto. Geppetto is he's primarily a clockmaker, but he's kind of just an inventor. Actually, let me back up a little bit. It actually starts with Jiminy Cricket being a homeless bum like a wastrel on the streets. And he sees that there's a fire in Geppetto's house, and so he goes to warm his buns.
He's warming his butt. There's a lot of
butt stuff in this.
It's really weird.
And like that was one of the things they kept, which was weird. I was like, so really, you saw the first movie, and you're like, this movie has a lot of butt stuff. Make a note of that. We need to make sure we're true to the original.
Double down.
Double down on the butt stuff.
It's like they literally looked at the original and they're like, all right, what is this movie about? They're like, pretty much it's about really hot
someone
fish
on the animation
butts.
team. Someone on the animation team clearly had a thing for butts. Because there's like a clock of a boy getting spanked, and Pinocchio's like presenting all the time. And
So
the
Liam
first thing Jiminy
actually
does
did
is
the
like stick his
design
butt in the
for this
fire.
It's like Quentin Tarantino. Everyone says he likes feet. He's got like a foot fetish in all his
is that
movies.
his
This guy's got.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, you never heard that?
Oh yeah,
I've heard
it's a
that
huge
as well.
thing.
Yeah.
It's like this director with butts.
Okay, but to be fair to this director, I understand a butt fetish way more than I understand a foot fetish.
It's true. It's
Not
true.
the kink
Let's
shame
get into
anyone,
fetishes.
One's not
here,
really a
guys.
fetish.
Yeah, one's just kind of like
One's like normal. Very normal, to be fair.
feet, right?
Yeah, the feet, exactly.
Feet are normal.
He
That's
ends up
normal,
coming
right?
into the house of a woodworker named Geppetto, who primarily makes cuckoo clocks. And so he goes in and he's hiding and he's just observing like what's going on. Geppetto's got a cat named Figaro.
Figaro.
Hold on. Wait, just really quick side note.
Newton.
Side note.
like the
We should have
whitest way.
Liam pronounce all of the Italian names
Yeah.
because he's technically the most
Figaro.
Italian out of all of us.
Figaro.
Okay, it's
I'm
okay.
from the Northeast.
It's okay. So
So he has a cat Figaro and a fish Chloe, who
Cleo. Yeah.
a fish named Cleo, who is a goldfish with, and if you look at the thumbnail, you'll see it. It just has the most absurd bedroom eyes. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I had a theory. I was thinking about this on the way over, and I have a theory that
Oh, here we go. Liam
the origin of furries is Disney.
could be.
Because think about it, you have Sexy Eyes Cleo,
Yeah.
Robin Hood, the animated one,
Yeah.
Maid Marian. Come on, like.
Nala-
I'm
Nala
putting
from The Lion
Nala
King?
from The Lion King.
Wow.
I'm putting
Why do I wanna touch that
100% of
lion?
the existence of
Oh,
furries.
Greg.
I'm putting on Disney's shoulders, for better or for worse. I'm not judging. I'm just
Yeah.
saying Disney did it, and Disney is why. And I bet if you ask like 90% of people who are furries, I bet 90% of them would say either they it was because of a Disney film, or it was because of if it wasn't from like someone else who was a furry like bringing them into it, it was because of Disney.
That's very
So,
interesting. I think you might have something there.
I
There's
think-
no
I think there's something
unattractive.
there. I'm trying to think of
animals in
other
the Disney
media
world.
empires that have really sexy anthropomorphic animals, and I can't think of any.
And that's the biggest empire, really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
she's
say
hot.
Disney
She's a
has
hot
has
fish,
the
for
has
sure.
the a monopoly on
Yeah,
anime.
Greg and I like
Hot.
Cleo shows up, and Greg and I stop and look at each other like, okay, why is this fish sexy? What
First
what
thing
was the
I
purpose
noticed.
of this?
And she's like sexualized too.
Yeah.
She's like her whole thing is she kisses everybody.
Yeah.
and
And that was another thing. They kept that in the live action. It wasn't like they didn't flounder her.
Right,
They kept the bedroom eyes.
Flounder. What an
Now
atrocity.
she's sexy but 3D.
All right, so keep
Anyways,
going with
continuing.
synopsis.
So
Yeah,
he
you
goes
guys
in
get
there
carried
and
away.
he sees Geppetto doing his thing. The clock's going off. These fancy. And it's kind of funny. Jiminy keeps breaking the fourth wall, but he keeps responding to everything as though like all these woodworking things as though they're real. It's weird. And also, Jiminy is a horn dog.
Yeah, Jiminy.
Oh yeah, he is.
Another butt stuff.
Yeah.
He like puts his hand on a carving of a woman with a big ass, and he's like, "Oh, pardon me, ma'am."
Yep.
But yeah, and anyways, I'm gonna kind of gloss over that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he
Speed
sees
up.
that Geppetto is working on this puppet, and he makes this puppet. Geppetto makes this puppet. And he's really proud of it. And he's like, and then they see a star, a shooting star, and they make a wish. And he's like, "Oh, what if Pinocchio was a real boy? Wouldn't that be something?" And so then they all go to sleep, and Jiminy can't sleep because everyone's snoring and the clocks are going off. And so the blue fairy shows up, which I forgot to do half-assed research on this, but it looked to me like she was like rotoscoped.
What does that mean?
Wait, no,
It was
this
like
is
an
the
old
original.
version of the original.
Oh, you really
It
think?
looked because I don't know what it was, but the animation for the blue fairy looked different from everything
so
else.
all rotoscoping is an editing technique where you actually go frame by frame and move
it's
something along.
basically like old school analog mocap.
Yeah, it's like what you had to do for lightsabers when you had a stick and you're like, let's animate a big light beam. And then every scene the stick moves, you have to like move the light beam, and then the stick moves and you move the light beam.
I could be wrong on that.
It's like stop motion editing.
That's what I was thinking.
But the way she looked, she looked more human than everything else.
For sure.
Yeah, she looked different.
Yeah.
So I meant to look that up, but she looked rotoscoped to me, which is pretty cool if they did it. The animation was great. So Pinocchio comes to life, and she tells Pinocchio, "But you can become a real boy if you have."
So she animates Pinocchio. So Pinocchio becomes an animated wooden
puppet with no
he
strings.
Says, "Am I real?" And she says, "Well, you'll become real when you make decisions on." And like basically, if you're
when you
a good
learn
boy.
to choose right from wrong.
Yeah, it's all about choices. He goes, "Well, how will I know?" She says, "Your conscience," and then
Jiminy
Cricket
gets elected to be the
walks up,
conscience.
becomes the conscience, and then the movie kind of starts.
Yeah. And so the very what's funny is they go through this whole thing where Geppetto's like, "Hooray, he's a real boy," and then they dance around, and then the very next day he's like, "Okay, time for you to go to school," and literally just like yeets him out, no direction. It's kind of Geppetto's fault. And then on the way he meets a fox. And what was that?
Honest John.
Honest John. And Honest John's sidekick was Gideon.
It's like a little cat. It's like a little bobcat or something.
Like a cat.
I don't know.
What the Gideon is.
Yeah,
right?
Gideon.
Yeah.
A mute, like the dumb idiot.
Classic Disney dumb
idiot.
Yeah.
They get into some escapades, but ultimately Pinocchio gets lured away from going to school to become famous. And there's a whole song about being an actor and how great it is and how fame is great. And he ends up going to this puppet show run by this guy named Stromboli, which
sick name.
Italian guy named Stromboli.
Wait, hold on. Liam needs to say it. Let's hear it.
Stromboli.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, it'd be pronounced Stromboli.
Stromboli is actually like my favorite villain. He's not even the central villain, but he's like that's like my favorite character name. I think in Disney. It's so sick.
Pinocchio goes and joins Stromboli's show, and is the famous puppet with no strings. And he sings a whole song about there are no strings on him. It's really popular. Everyone loves it. They throw a bunch of money at him. And then he's like, okay, well, it's time for me to go home. And Stromboli says, nah, bitch, throws him in a cage and says, you're my breadwinner now. And so he's like crying in the cage. Jiminy shows up. Jimmy's like, I can't get you out of here. And so the blue fairy shows up and says, Pinocchio, what were you doing? And he starts lying and his nose starts growing. And he doesn't catch on, but Jiminy figures out like, whenever you lie, your nose grows. Or the blue fairy actually tells him, she has a line. She says something like,
"So there's actually no
lies
indication.
Always grow," or something like that.
No. So there actually was no indication as like that just starts. And I didn't know this in rewatching it, but his nose just starts growing. There was no like, "Hey, by the way, if you lie, your nose is going to grow."
Oh no, she never says that to him before, like that. But that
she does make a small connection, like you said. She says something along the lines of like, just like a lie continues to grow, or something like that. But it kind of just starts happening. And then they kind of put it together. They're like, oh. Like you just keep lying, and that's why your nose is growing.
And so the blue fairy's like, okay, I'll help you this once. Sets him free, and then he ends up getting shanghaied into going to Pleasure Island, where he smokes and drinks beer and plays billiards. Gasp! The horror. It's funny. It's very what a hobby. Just playing billiards. It's fun. It's really what was really funny was it's kind of prudish, obviously like smoking and drinking, but there are some of the things you're like. I mean, I don't see why that would be bad. It's probably one of those things where, at the time, which this was what, the 40s?
This came out in
1940.
Yeah.
I believe
at the time, the people who you would see going to billiard bars would be like seedy people.
It's more the association of a billiard.
It's like not that billiards are inherently bad, but that like the people who go and play billiards are the people who are skipping school and
smoke cigarettes, just ripping cigs.
It is a weird place for Disney to like draw a line though, like in the 1940s, like these are people that smoke and drink are like bad. It's like that time period. That's all people did.
I need to look up what time did Music Man, the Broadway musical Music Man, come out? Because there's a whole song about. Pool being like there's a whole song about you got trouble with a capital T that rhymes with P that stands for pool.
Yes.
So I mean it wasn't. I'm guessing it was like an association with seedy people hang out at these kinds of places because they don't got anywhere else to be.
Past the 40s though. I don't know if you guys ever seen Dazed and Confused, but that's where like the D-gens went. They went to the pool hall and just like.
Original
smoked
Music Man.
Yeah, it smoked and drank.
The whole night. Yeah.
Original Music Man, 1962.
Okay, so it was
It
afterwards.
was a lot later.
But yeah, so I mean, apparently pool halls are like notoriously seedy and grungy. But anyways, I got a little bit distracted. But so he is with this kid. Oh, what was the kid's name?
Lampwig.
Lampwig.
Actually, hold on, time out, Liam.
Lampwig.
There we go.
I actually
Lampwick,
you couldn't have. I could not have guessed that was his name.
It's actually. I think it's Lampwick.
I thought it was Lampwick.
I thought it was Lampwick.
I think it's Lampwick too. That's why I wanted Liam to correct me. He didn't.
I'm a follower.
But yeah, so Lampwick, they're in the pool hall and they're drinking beer and smoking cigars, and then Lampwick, Jiminy separately, who's trying to find Pinocchio on Pleasure Island, finds the basement where they're throwing these donkeys in crates to go to the salt mines and the circus and all these other places, and he finds out that the boys who are being sent to Pleasure Island are turning into jackasses, and it's this whole thing like if a boy spends too much time being a jackass, he turns into a jackass, right? Haha, funny pun. So he finds that out, and then he goes to find Pinocchio, and right when he finds Pinocchio, Lampwick starts turning into a donkey, and Pinocchio sees it and then, like, puts the cigar down, and puts the beer down. So Lampwick turns into a donkey, and Pinocchio just gets the ears and the tail, and so they escape from the shadow monsters, which in the live action, in the original, they're just like these weird shadowy figures that kind of look like gorillas. But in the live action one, they're actually smoke monsters.
Yeah, they're kind of scary. Well, and they're scary in both.
Yeah, they're scary in both. So they get back to land. They find out Geppetto has left to try to find Pinocchio because Pinocchio didn't get home. So he freaked out, grabbed Cleo and Figaro for whatever reason, and set out to find Pinocchio. And turns out they got swallowed by Monstro, who's this giant whale monster thing because it eats people. So it's
whales are offended.
Yeah.
It's just a
appreciate that.
It was the 40s, so I guess whaling was still okay. They're like, screw these big bastards. But so Pinocchio decides to be brave and to go save him, and they're like, no. Maybe it's Jiminy says, you're probably gonna die if you try to you can't go to Monstro, and he's like, but I have to do it anyway. So he shows courage. They end up getting swallowed by Monstro. And it's funny because they have this whole trek under the sea, and they keep asking fish and random sea creatures like, hey, have you guys seen Monstro? And they're all like, ah, and then run away. But he eventually finds Monstro, gets eaten by Monstro, and meets Geppetto and Cleo and Figaro, who are stuck in there and like fishing for fish. And then Pinocchio has a callback to him smoking his first cigar and sneezing and like throwing up. And he's like, oh, what if we just smoke out Monstro? He'll sneeze us out. So that happens. They escape. He turns back into, and then because of that, Blue Fairy shows up and he turns into a real boy. Although what's weird is he's clearly fine breathing underwater. But after Monstro shoots them out and they make the big escape, Geppetto like wakes up and then Pinocchio's like face down in a puddle. And he's like, oh no. But I'm like, but we already saw he can breathe underwater. So I don't see
the imagery is still not
pretty. Oh, it's pretty dark. If you just like take a frame of that, it looks like a dead kid face down in the puddle.
I read
it's
somewhere,
pretty dark, but
correct me if I'm wrong, but was the symbolism that he did die, Pinocchio?
Maybe.
But then he turned to a real boy because of
and he came back to life.
Courage and
it might be that it might be like the Constantine sort of thing where it's like, oh, you made the sacrifice you were supposed to, so even though you died, you get to live again.
You're worthy of it.
That's what I thought it was.
It could have been that.
Could be.
It could have been that.
How did he get away in the original from the monster? Because I obviously didn't watch the original.
It sneezes him out, and they literally it's almost exactly the same. They just go,
but there's a big difference.
No motor feed.
Okay.
No motor feed.
They're just paddling and
they're
trying to outrace this thing, and they kind of make it right to the shoreline right when it hits them, and hits like it kind of shoots them through.
Shoots them through the little grotto. Yeah, the little grotto part is the same, but then instead of Geppetto being face down, it's Pinocchio face down.
Gotcha.
But that's that's
pretty much the whole movie.
That's the whole,
yeah, he turns into a boy, and then it plays the "When You Wish Upon a Star" again. Which, if you didn't know, the "When You Wish Upon a Star" song is the song that plays over the Disney Castle intro. That
great song.
It's a good song. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one. So no complaints about the music. Music was fine.
Yeah.
It's very well animated. Like, it's pretty animation. I don't know if I like it.
You get the first take. So to tell us about
my first take, again, a lot of butt stuff. A lot of stuff where you're like, okay, what's going on with the director or the animator or whoever made these decisions? I think the story is fine. As we'll get to, the live action, I think, does a worse job with this, but it really feels like, so the whole gist of it is that Pinocchio has to choose between right and wrong. But no one ever tells him what's right and wrong. And it's like,
thought.
okay, your conscience is supposed to tell you, right? And a human being would inherently have a conscience that would a moral compass. Mm-hmm. He's a wooden puppet. Mm-hmm. He does not have that, and the whole point is that Jiminy's supposed to be that for him, but Jiminy doesn't really do that. Like, there aren't that many. I think there's only like one instance where Jiminy's like, "Don't do this," and then Pinocchio does it.
And there's no,
because the whole time he's like messing around on Pleasure Island, Jiminy is not there.
Yeah.
So he has no idea that he has no idea that these things are not okay for him to do.
100%.
Until he starts turning into a donkey.
There's no why. It's like he's picking up the like, okay, beer, smoking are like bad, but like why? Like, he's a blank slate. He has no idea why those things are bad. And obviously we know, but like,
and like, I don't even believe in tabula rasa, but in this case, Pinocchio is actually tabula rasa. Like, he is nothing.
Yeah.
He's a wooden doll, right? And he has to become a Yoruba boy by learning. And I mean,
making mistakes though too. That's like the correlation with being like an actual human is like you learn, like you don't inherently always know what's right or wrong.
Sure.
Like you have to go and kind of mess up yourself.
Right. For sure.
Sure, but I think a lot of times you'll have an intimation of what's right and wrong, whereas Pinocchio clearly doesn't have that.
Right.
It does, and I think if the story was more Jiminy is telling him not to do it, and then he's doing it in spite of Jiminy telling him not to do it, I think it would be a stronger message.
Yeah.
And that you're fighting, when you lose out to your conscience, that's when you're becoming a jackass.
Yeah.
And it's when you listen to your conscience that you don't. But I just feel like they set that up, but I feel like they don't pay that off very well in the movie.
Yeah.
And in the new one, they don't pay it off at all, but we'll get there.
And I will agree, even in the original, there is a little bit of like, I think mainly the theme, at least in that portion of the movie, is like, it's about him kind of just doing what his father says. It's not even going into detail like what his father is saying. It's just like, hey, step one is like, when your parents say something, go and do it. We're not even going to talk about what it means that you're going through with this thing that's happening. It's just like from the earliest stages, it's your dad says go to school, that's what you do. Like Jiminy doesn't even necessarily talk about like the reasons you should go to school. He's just like, well, you're going to school. Like you could be famous, but like step also, one is just do what your parents say.
Sure.
And it's a super basic, easy message.
So that's arguably the one where he clearly should have just gone to school, although the remake ruins that. But so here's the thing about that is he's like, oh, I want to make my dad proud. How am I going to make my dad proud? By going to school. And this other guy comes in and says, hey, if you become famous, you'll really make your dad proud. And he's like, oh, what I'm trying to do is make my dad proud. If this is what accomplishes it, he has no idea why. Like, they never give him a reason why he should go to school other than his dad said so. Mm-hmm. So he's like, well, I want to do good things for my dad. If this is a better way to do it, then I'm going to do that instead. So, in a sense, he's making the wrong choice for the right reasons, if that makes sense. That doesn't justify it.
Sure.
But I don't see that he's not really struggling with right and wrong necessarily in that as he sees it. So he's not fighting against temptation necessarily because he doesn't understand that it's temptation to a wrong thing. He's just like, oh, this is a way I can make my dad proud, then I want to pursue that.
Yeah, I will say that line, the lines of like, I guess what would you call it, like the moral justification of what Pinocchio is doing.
Yeah.
Is kind of funny the whole movie because he is so like, you've watched it. You're like, he's a wooden boy who literally has no idea what life is. Like he's getting manipulated.
He's obviously very talented because he learned that whole song and dance routine in an afternoon.
Yeah.
So
he's a talented guy.
Also, is Disney, the entertainment company, trying to say, stay in school, kids. Don't become an actor. Don't go into showbiz.
That's the theme.
That might be a good lesson.
Right.
Actors are the dredges of society.
Actors are the dregs of society. Actors are garbage. Show business is nonsense. Mm-hmm. Don't spend your money on that. Go to school. Be a good kid.
And maybe that's like more like, maybe that was more applicable back then, but like it was funny watching the new one and they still like try to push that theme across. I'm like, bro, this entire movie's a cash grab by a bunch of like unhappy Hollywood people. And they're trying to tell us to like, that actors suck or whatever. It was hilarious.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
For the most part.
There was irony in it.
So, okay, so there's a later part in this movie, and a lot of the responses from people now that go back and watch Pinocchio, and we've gotten a little bit of this from chat as well, is that it's a pretty dark movie on the rewatch. Like, you rewatch it and you're kind of like, it seems a little heavy.
There's a lot of dead kid imagery.
And specifically, there's a lot of talk, and if you just kind of look it up, you're like, hey, Pinocchio takes. A lot of it revolves around this whole idea of like taking kids to Pleasure Island and the kind of like the ickiness of that.
Yeah.
And so like, what did you guys, when I was watching with Nathanael, I said the same thing because I forgot about the donkey thing. And I'm like, there's this scene where the coachman, who's like the most evil character of all of them, like you even have the temptation character whose name is Honest John. He represents temptation the whole movie. That's all he is like, oh, let's go make some more money. And he goes and talks to the coachman, and he's even scared of the coachman. He's like grabbing his friend, and he's like, this guy's horrifying. And the coachman is like, hey, let's go steal these boys. We'll take them to Pleasure Island. And Honest John is like, yeah, that's illegal. We can't do that. And then he goes, well, don't worry. They won't come back as boys. And he smiles, and you're like, And I looked at Nathanael, I'm like, are they?
Those overtones, I think, are... You notice those overtones because of things that have happened in our history. So I think in the 40s, you would not see that as anything other than an allegory. I think it's an allegory for like, that's Satan. He's Satan. Yeah. He's tempting these kids, right? He's tempting them to do these things, and then they're suffering the consequences of them giving into them temptations, right? He's not forcing them to do anything,
right?
Which in the real live action he does, but but he's just saying, hey, come to Pleasure Island. Yeah, he's like, oh. He's basically like, go to Pleasure Island, you pussy. Okay, Satan.
Yeah, I mean, and there definitely is like upon further watching. But I also agreed that
I don't think that it's intended to have any sort of.
I agree.
Yeah,
Jeffrey Epstein ruined Pinocchio.
Yeah, so I think that is us reading something into there. Which I mean, you could take it as an allegory for that nowadays and say, hey, this also serves as an allegory for this, even though it wasn't intended for that. But it was. I don't think you could. Again, it's the 1940s. I highly doubt that was on the top of their minds.
Nobody was triggered over anything. Like it was just like, it is what it is.
They're like bad.
It's not that deep. It was literally what they thought about everything in the 19.
It is what you think it is.
They are who we thought they were. Yeah, and we let them off the hook.
But it's like he's obviously got clear imagery to like the devil, even at the point where he screams like they don't come back as boys. His face turns red. His hair looks like horns.
I think he's clearly supposed to be Satan, and then he has his smoke demons, which are clearly supposed to be demons.
Yeah.
So I think that imagery is pretty blatant, and I'm wondering. Okay, so if you want to talk about Christian overtones, you can talk about temptation from the world, the flesh, and the devil. So if you think about it that way, then Pleasure Island represents the temptation from the devil, and Honest John represents temptation from the world, and then temptation from the flesh comes from within.
Right.
So, if you think about it that way, I don't know that Pinocchio was trying to be overtly Christian in this sense. I highly doubt it, but it kind of works out that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like the overall message of it, and again, this is in stark contrast to the remake, which makes it so, painful to watch.
We'll get there.
But like the blatant message is just kind of like, hey, you're going to have a lot of wrong impulses in this life. And in this case, we're going to call your conscience Jiminy Cricket. But like you're going to need a helper of some kind throughout this life. And like that represents itself in several different ways, right? So in him not listening to his conscience even kind of loses its way. So it's almost like you need to have an interaction there with yourself. Like you need to be like interacting with that part of you that's drawing you out of like your normal impulses. Otherwise, like he's also becoming tainted by he's like, well, maybe like being famous is good. Like I don't know. Like he's kind of doing it now. So it's like I've tasted it and I was kind of told by my dad to stay away from this, but now it's starting to seem good, and of course it's bad, right? Like it leads you to destruction. Like that's not what you're supposed to be doing at the time. And obviously it's a movie and it's a story, so everything's very black and white and cut and dry, and it's not necessarily that way in the real world, but in order to tell the story, it's very much like, hey, these are these bad things, and your impulses are going to be to lead you to them. So you need to start making choices that go against those impulses and say, hey, listen, it's not like the easy, fun thing to go to school, but it's what I should be doing right now. And that message is it's kind of easy and basic.
And that's where I think that the messaging is there, but it could have been much clearer with just a couple extra bits of dialogue where it was like, now, son, you need to go to school because that's what good boys do, or something like that, where it clearly sets up that Pinocchio understands that going to school is what he should be doing, and not these other things. Because to me, when I watch the movie, it's not clear that Pinocchio understands that.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that was one of the things throughout the whole movie that I think you lose a little bit, because even if it was understood, he's got the mentality of like an infant. Like he's been alive for 0.0, so he doesn't even know certain words. And so of course he's going to be just confused by the next person. So maybe some more exposition as far as like, hey, this is what you should do. My only other thought is that 1940s, maybe it was more so like you're just going to school. If you're not, like you're just blatantly doing the wrong thing, and everybody
the other
knows
option
that.
was for him to be in the factory making ammunition for the war.
Correct.
or to be ammunition himself.
Yeah, affix bayonets, Pinocchio.
It's a bayonet, right?
It's a bayonet. Is it a bayonet?
Oh yeah, bayonet.
It's
yeah,
a bayonet.
Yeah.
Quick, Pinocchio, tell a lie. Charge! I'm really happy to be in this trench.
All right, so the real question.
World War II wasn't trench warfare.
Does Pinocchio have the greatest names in any Disney movie?
Stromboli. I've already spoken on Stromboli.
We got
That's the goat.
Stromboli.
That's the goat name.
Go down the list.
Honest
Stromboli.
Stromboli.
Geppetto.
Jiminy Cricket.
Jiminy, Geppetto, Stromboli. You have
Jiminy Cricket is clearly supposed to be like styled after Jimmy Stewart.
Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And then like
wait, hold on. What? Jimmy Stewart?
Yeah,
I think there's multiple Jimmy Stewarts.
The older one.
I think you're thinking
old
of
actor one.
Okay, I didn't know it. Old Jimmy Stewart.
Wait, what? But wasn't this movie
predated
based on a book?
Almost everything Disney did.
Half-ass research
was
tells
based
me
on
that it was
on
based
a
on
book,
like an
a fable.
1800s book.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But maybe they
No,
took
I mean
Jiminy
like
Cricket
when they
and adapted it.
when they
Yeah,
animated
okay,
it.
that makes sense.
I think Jimmy Stewart was around in the 40s.
Which the book is even darker.
True.
That's always
he gets
true.
Like
That's
that.
always true.
Pinocchio gets like shot and hung in the book, and like
What?
they someone's gonna fact check me on that. I don't think that's entirely
In that
true.
order?
They're doing that for
They
clicks.
shoot
I think
him
he
and
does
then they
get
hang
hung.
up his body
I
on
literally
the
just
news.
it's half-ass research, so I literally just read like a paragraph of something. It was like he got like burned and hung, and like Geppetto like ate Cleo out on the water because he was like hungry. Like,
This has got to be a
fish,
lie.
his pet
This has got to
fish.
be a lie.
Someone fact check me in the chat section.
Did he eat her because he was hungry, or did he eat her
because
because
he just wanted to make out with her?
Dude, come on, man.
Did he?
Your Greg
Yikes.
goes again.
Yikes.
This is sad.
Yikes.
Cleo the fish or Emma Watson, straight up.
This shouldn't be as hard as it is.
Cleo.
I mean,
There's an argument. to
I've
be
never
made.
seen, again,
I
you
mean-
have your feelings towards Emma Watson.
Cleo's.
Emma Watson didn't show up on screen. I was like, why is Emma Watson sexy?
I know.
Cleo shows up on screen. I'm like, damn.
Cleo's fine.
Hold on a minute. Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
What is Steve-O? So Steve-O knows briefly about our interest in Emma Watson.
Yes.
So
You mean the Emma Watson controversy?
Nathaniel, why don't you
Watson
ask him? Why don't you ask him? Like, let's see what he has to say about Emma
Is
Watson.
Emma Watson the appropriate aesthetic
Yes.
to play Belle in Beauty and the Beast?
In what context, though?
In what context of you're updating the animated version?
Yep.
Picture animated Belle,
Yep.
most beautiful woman in town. Although arguably the three blonde chicks that they animated were also pretty hot.
Okay.
pretty
Yeah, I get
damn
what you're
fine.
asking.
But
yeah, I mean,
Emma Watson,
Could they
does
have
she
casted
stick
better?
out as like a captivating, alluring individual like Belle does?
Don't let him.
could they have casted better? Yes. Did she play the role? I think. Yeah, absolutely. Then yes. To answer your question, I think she's like suffices.
The direct phrase was, "She's not good looking enough,"
No.
and actually
is
it
not-
was, "She's butt ugly."
I don't think that's fair to
and
say.
Anybody,
Yeah, I would strongly disagree
and
with that.
anybody could have played her
Whoa,
better.
Liam.
I'd like to rescind my statements on Emma Watson.
I'm just saying, man.
She's a
You're trying to
beautiful woman,
sway
but she's
Steve-O
not the
over
appropriate
here.
type of beautiful for Belle.
You're trying to sway Steve-O here. I'm trying to give him the full picture.
Basically,
what I'm dealing with.
the argument was
With
that
these two.
me and Nathaniel thought that the representation of Belle, whose name means beauty, and she represented herself in the animated series as like a stunning, makes everybody else look ugly type person. That's stunning. Like you go and watch the live action Aladdin and you see Jasmine, you're like, oh my gosh, that girl's super fine. Yep. And then you watch live action Beauty and the Beast, and Emma Watson just kind of looked like a townsperson. And we were like, hey.
She did kind of look like it. And that may have been wardrobe's fault.
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause I don't
She
think,
may
I don't
have
think
just
it's
looked-
actually Emma Watson. I think it's the way that they made her look in the
I
movie.
might just
which is-
have a hang up on Emma Watson because to me she looks like a sibling, and so I just can't like.
It's crazy.
Roll
dude.
Tide.
Yeah, if she's my sibling.
Oh my god!
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Sorry, Britton, if you're watching.
We know they are.
Okay, so we established that they have good names. We also established that Cleo might be more attractive than.
We didn't establish that at all.
Did we
I think
not?
we're 50-50 split.
Are we a 50-50 split?
Yeah, and you know who's
Yep.
on
We
either
know
side.
it's split. It's this
pretty
way.
obvious.
It's pretty obvious.
Why is she fine? Let's open it. Okay, chat. Why? Go look.
10 out of 10, guys. 10 out of 10.
Go look at Cleo right now.
sound
Go
like
look at
that.
live action
I
Cleo.
don't sound like that.
You can't
do I?
tell what you sound like. No, you don't.
I listen to this podcast.
It's funny. because this is just kind of the mess around voice. I actually there's someone who works at the place I work and
talks like that.
I was walking in the hall and I heard that voice and I was like, that's a real person's voice. And then we kind of feel bad for using that as my joke voice, but I was like, I'm not like doing it to insult that person.
I thought you were gonna say I didn't see her, and I was like, Leah. That's what I thought you were gonna say. I was just waiting for it.
Yep, that's what I was like. I was like,
Liam, what are you doing here?
Liam, I didn't know. I thought I smelled fish. What are you doing?
Oh my God,
Steve-O, this is what I deal with.
You guys.
On an every other week basis.
Yeah.
It's good to have another sane human being here with us.
Steve-O, what did you think about the live action
Yeah,
Pinocchio?
tell us your thoughts.
Live
on this.
action or original? Oh, you saw.
Sorry, original.
I saw bits. Oh no,
Original.
I actually didn't see. I didn't see the original, so I'm
Okay.
not going to comment on that one.
Okay, so no comment on the
Yep.
original.
I'll
No
just-
comment on the butt
Yep.
stuff.
No. Yep.
So what
Happy
are,
for you,
what
man.
are our last
Enjoyed it.
what are our last
Congrats
thoughts
on
on animated Pinocchio?
I have a take.
Yeah,
Go
okay,
for it.
let's hear it.
I think the real villain of the movie is Jiminy Cricket.
He gets a badge, and I don't think he earned that badge. I will say that.
I think who's more useless, Jiminy Cricket or the guy from Dumbo, Stephen Rat or whatever his name is? Oliver Mouse.
Okay.
Oliver Mouse or whatever his name was. No, Timothy Mouse.
Timothy Mouse.
Who's more
Timothy
useless?
Mouse was a bro.
Okay.
Don't even put respect on Timothy
this
Mouse's
is also
name.
just a terrible take.
So
And
we're
I
saying
didn't particularly like Dumbo, but don't you disrespect
So
Timothy
we're saying
Mouse.
Jiminy Cricket is more useless than
Okay.
Timothy
No,
Rat.
it's Timothy Mouse.
Timothy Mouse.
One. Okay,
And he was
Yes.
a Chad, and you cannot deny it.
I
he was,
can deny it.
He was a
I
good
have.
friend. Okay, and Jiminy Cricket was not useless. Okay,
He was so useless,
He
dude.
represented the neglected conscience. He represented in the movie the neglected conscience of a child.
I don't think
who
Jiminy
constantly
did
follows
as
their
much as
impulses.
he should have. Now, in the live action, Jiminy Cricket was beyond useless. You could have taken him out of the movie, and the same stuff would have happened.
I thought he was almost equivalently useless.
No,
he absolutely.
he
just
100% blew it.
Just blew
and I
it.
don't think he deserved the badge at the end.
No, he didn't do anything but deserve that.
but
But he's sleeping. He's sleeping in on Pinocchio's
Day
first
one,
day as
day one.
a
But you guys-
entity.
as a being.
And he's getting some Z's
Good luck,
in.
kid.
He's catching some Z's.
But guys,
What?
Like the whole movie is very image driven. Like Jimmy doesn't exist as a character in the movie. You have to he's just his conscience. He's neglected the whole movie. That's the point. Is that he's constantly like behind.
See,
the
I
main
think you're
character.
just
The main
thinking too far
character
into
acts,
this.
and then the
I think
conscience
you're
comes
overthinking
along. No, that's it's very clear imagery. It's like you act on something, your conscience follows that action and says, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't do this," and then it gets ignored. And that's
Right,
exactly
but if your
the
conscience
character he
isn't there
represents.
to say, but this is different. It's one thing if conscience being ignored is one thing. If it's like Jimmy's there and says, "Hey, Pinocchio, don't do this," and Pinocchio says, "Okay, yeah, but I want to do it." That's you ignoring your conscience.
Right.
But when your conscience is just physically not present
Sleeping
because you
in,
don't know where it
okay,
is and you never
like-
had one, I just don't think that analogy works very well.
No, but okay. So if in this analogy where your conscience is an actual person, an actual being, and it's not there, what would that represent? Represent you being impulsive and not thinking about your conscience, and then later your
For a
conscience
normal
coming
person, yes, but for someone who literally has not existed, I don't think it's fair to put the blame on Pinocchio.
No,
This
there's
isn't
no
about
blame
putting
on
the blame.
Pinocchio.
This is about the way that the story is told and
Again,
what the imagery they're trying to
I think
use.
the themes are there, but they're blurry, and they could have done a little more to kind of sharpen them up. And I really think
I agree.
I really think what they should have done is just have Jiminy telling Pinocchio, "Don't do this" more often.
Yep.
And having Pinocchio directly defy Jiminy for whatever reason, and you can have him justify, be like okay, for instance, the one part
He
where
does that several
clearly like
times.
he clearly disobeys. He clearly disobeys what he's supposed to do is when he's supposed to go to school and he goes to Stromboli's instead.
right?
And that's like the one instance where I remember Jimmy is like,
Not when
no,
he
we have to go to school. And then he basically gets kidnapped, which, if you're coerced against your will, is it really your fault? I don't think so. But that's the instance where he's like, whoa, but if I can make my dad more proud as an actor than by going to school, then I'm going to be an actor, even though he told me to go to school. And that's where he can have the fight with Jiminy. They almost never fought, which I feel like they should have.
Mm-hmm.
They should have had some clashes. I don't know. I just feel like
okay,
the imagery could have
Jiminy
been
Cricket
stronger.
So I'm going to go
dude.
through the three instances in which he did. So you have the initial one where he reinforces what the dad said. You're going to school. That's temptation. Don't listen to him. All good things his conscience is telling you, he disregards and he goes to temptation.
Sure.
He goes and he gets locked up. He gets saved. They're out. And then now he says, what does he say now? Well, now you have to go to school. You got to go straight to school. Ignore temptation. Temptation's back. it just says, hey, come with me to Pleasure Island. I got a ticket for you. He ignores his conscience and he goes to Pleasure Island. Then he gets to Pleasure Island and Jiminy finds him there. And he's like, hey, you got to get out of here. And Lampwig is like making fun of him. And Pinocchio's kind of just sitting there. And then eventually he just says, fine, forget about it. Like you go have your fun. And he leaves. And then he sees them being turned into donkeys. And he comes back and he saves Pinocchio. Those are all three decision moments of the movie. And he gives advice in all three of those moments.
The thing is, when he goes to Pleasure Island, it's night. He's like, yeah, okay, well, let's go to school this time. He's like, okay, I will. He basically gets shanghaied by the Pleasure Island guys. Jimmy gets left behind.
No,
and it's not his fault.
He's dumb. He's irrelevant.
Again, I just think they could have cemented those themes a little bit better.
When he got his badge at the end, were you like, yeah, go Jiminy?
Yes.
You're rooting for him?
No, he didn't earn that.
No, he didn't earn it. I was like, oh my what?
God. Dude, giving out when you guys have kids and you're constantly telling them things and they're just disregarding everything you say, and then at the very end somebody recognizes that you've been at least saying the right things the whole time, and they're like, it's really not you, it's your punk kid. I'll want you to get a star then. I will. I'll want you to get a little medal that says you've been doing a decent job.
Or when you're like, oh, it's my kid's first day of school, I'm going to sleep in.
Yeah. He can get to the bus by himself.
Your kids go on the bus.
He can get to the bus by himself.
Like Pinocchio got lucky. Essentially is what like everyone's arguing. Like,
great plot twist. I'm homeschooling.
Doesn't hit
Kids
as hard.
just sitting downstairs at the table.
Wait.
What do I do?
But
didn't do your schoolwork. Detention right away.
So that's a good point Steve-O brings up. So did Pinocchio just get lucky in this movie? Did he actually have any character changes? Was there a character arc?
See, that's the thing. Pinocchio, again, he has that one moment where he actually self-determines to go be courageous. The rest of the time, he's kind of just being swept along. Now, yes, he should have resisted. He should have chosen to go to school. He should have chosen not to go to Pleasure Island. Although, it's arguable how much choice he actually had in the matter, because like, Honest John has his hand on his shoulder. It's like steering him in a way.
Yeah.
Right? So, he's being, it feels borderline coercive. In all the instances that he except for when he and Jiminy have the fight on Pleasure Island, but when he's like, oh, I need to go save my dad from Monstro, and Jiminy's like, yeah, you'll die, and he's like, I'm gonna have to do it anyway. So yeah, I think he does have a character. He does something courageous.
Right. Like for once, he's not just doing. He's not just doing.
He's not just following
the world is telling him. Like he's actually like. Hey.
Yeah, and again, the themes are there. I just feel like they could have reinforced them. They just could have made them a little sharper.
And I think I agree with that part. Like I think it could have been more like, how is he growing? Because I had the same thought where I was like, how has he changed? Like he went from doing what certain people say to doing what other people say, but at the end he's doing what he thinks is right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we need to be a little bit broader on these themes when people tend to do the writing for the writer. It's like you need to analyze what's actually there. So we can talk about deeper themes, but are those actually there? I think we tend to get lost in the weeds a little bit, trying to see themes where there maybe wasn't as much attention to detail in this one. Whereas something like Beauty and the Beast has very, very clear and strong themes that are very well reinforced, and so you can dig deep for those. Whereas Pinocchio, I don't think I think it's very surface level.
Like you said, all it takes is a couple extra lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
And I probably would have felt better about the direction of the theme.
Yeah.
It just felt fuzzy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we generally like sympathize more with like guides that we like Dory in Finding Nemo. Like I think that she's kind of like the poster child of like what a guide should be in like the story brand framework.
Yeah.
And I don't think necessarily we get that from Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what bothers people. It's like,
Jiminy Cricket is clearly supposed to be the guide character in the movie.
Right.
And,
correct.
And
he's literally named
but he's
as the
not,
guide
though. He doesn't really do like, he pops in when he needs to, kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe the story is actually about Jiminy learning to be a responsible conscience.
Wow.
No, but he doesn't change. Those are stupid.
That's what I mean. It's doing the writer's work for them. It's a bad habit that a lot of people do, because you see something with holes in it, you try to fill in holes, which is perfectly reasonable. But you want to try to stick to an analysis of what's actually there.
The movie's called Pinocchio.
It's about a wooden boy.
Pinocchio Cricket.
All right, so let's move on to the live action.
Oh, I will say, because you mentioned earlier that there was a lot of dark stuff in there. There's a lot of gallows humor. They're like sitting in Monstro, and Geppetto's like, I guess we're going to die of starvation. Just like nonchalantly.
It
But
definitely.
I really feel like it reflects the 40s time where they were, you might go to the war and not come back.
Yeah.
And people are a lot more nonchalant about death. I think there's a lot to be said about when you look at movies that are older and you look at the kind of humor that people had. There's a lot more gallows humor. Whereas nowadays, gallows humor is more like about depression and self-harm.
Right.
Whereas, back then it was like, oh, I might go into the woods and get eaten by a bear. What are you going to do? There's because we live in such a relatively safe society, I honestly think that's harmed us in a way.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to go back to these old things and see what people prioritize, what the people actually thought was important when you could just walk outside and just die from a bomb.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's definitely that's what makes watching these older movies more difficult and lots of times feeling like they're dated is because you're like, hey, they're probably trying to hit on a lot of themes that made a ton of sense. And I'm just a little off on all of them. It does seem like it's kind of right there as a movie to where you're like, all right, the general themes are as a child, do what your parents tell you, go to school. These are all very basic themes. And if you don't,
Right.
and the kind of comical view of if you keep letting yourself act like a jackass, you will turn into a jackass.
Yeah, and I think Pleasure Island is a very obvious example of, they're clearly giving you visual themes of what is considered bad behavior.
Right.
Smoking, drinking, vandalism, playing pool, right? So they're giving you visual shorthand for, this is the place where
You do
boys
bad.
behave badly, rather than, growing up to be a soldier and dying in a war.
Right. And I think we generally all get the general ideas of those, but for our age here, what is 80 years later, 40 years later, 60 years later, I don't know what it is.
You were right the first time.
It definitely hits different. We're like, hey, there's missing a couple elements there.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Well, I think in Pinocchio's case, I think I don't think the missing themes has anything to do with the culture gap.
Sure.
Because again, we look at older stories and you look at Peter Pan, you see those deeper themes.
Yeah,
And I think those
will
are a little
say
sharper in
did
Peter Pan.
Did a little bit better.
So again, I think Pinocchio was just it's just a little rough, which I guess is appropriate for something about a wooden puppet.
I think I liked Pinocchio more than
Dumbo.
Dumbo and Peter Pan. I
Oh,
didn't
we're
love
gonna have to
Pinocchio, but
I didn't love it either.
They
That's
all
what I
kind
would
of
say.
exist on a similar plane.
yeah,
but
they're like the old
I'll
Disney ones.
Yeah, I'll have to think about
Yeah.
how that lies. But all right, so let's spend a little bit of time. I'm just going to give a super brief synopsis on the live. There's already sad faces in the crowd here. I'm going to give a super brief synopsis on the live action one, which differs in some great detail, but mostly in small detail from the original. And then I will let these guys give us their thoughts. So the live action one starts off the same way. We have Geppetto making a puppet. In this one, there's more insinuation that it's like he's trying to make it look like a son he's lost. And so he makes this puppet. He has fun with it. Same little deal. He dances. He goes to sleep. And the blue fairy shows up. The blue fairy turns Pinocchio into a boy. She very clearly states that he's not a real boy. He is just a kind of a real boy. And in order to become a real boy, he needs to do these certain things. Same thing as the original. And so he informs Geppetto. And Geppetto wakes up and is very excited that he's like, yeah, I'm not quite a real boy yet. And so we have a lot more singing and dancing, just like the original. He goes to school just like the original. Gets tinted. He goes to Stromboli.
Aha. Hold on. You're missing a part between him going to school and Stromboli.
Oh,
in the
good
live
call,
action,
good call.
he gets kicked. He goes to school.
He makes it to school.
He walks in the door, and they kick him out
for being a
puppet.
right?
Which
being a
is
puppet,
again, it's one of those things where now this one is a little more forgivable because they have humanoid foxes and cats walking around and sexy eye fish.
We'll get there.
But
I'm still
again,
giving the synopsis.
we see so many times, like in Dumbo. One of the things that really frustrated me is people don't respond appropriately to something amazing happening. Like if I went up to and I saw a wooden puppet and it just started walking around, first of all, I think it was haunted. So first thing I would do is call for an exorcist. Second thing I would call Ghostbusters. But I wouldn't be like, get out of my school, you damn puppet. We don't like your kind around here. Like what?
So anyways, we're gonna try to save our.
Would you
takes.
call Ghostbusters 2016 or the original?
I'll call original first, but they're mostly old or dead. So I would resort
have to call
I
Amy
might
Schumer.
have to.
Kate McKinnon.
I'm calling Kate McKinnon and be like,
Speaking
She would solve it.
But for the first time in forever, I actually need your help.
Speaking of Ghostbusters 2016, I believe Jakob, he watched this movie too.
He
no?
did.
He
He wrote in.
Oh, he did.
Do we want to hear from Jakob?
Well, after
Let's
after
finish
my
this. Yeah,
synopsis,
let's finish the
we'll
synopsis.
hear from Jakob, and then
So,
we'll give our takes.
Jakob wrote
That
in.
move to Stromboli. Stromboli is pretty much the same, except
Okay.
for
Except for he has, okay, so Stromboli has like a team with him, among which is a minority individual who's also
Disabled. It's literally like she's a walking checkbox. Like she only exists in this movie. She does nothing in this movie. She exists in this movie just to check a box. But okay, so here's what's weird about Strombolis. Okay, so she's there and she's doing this little puppet, this like ballerina puppet. And what's weird is Pinocchio keeps acting like the ballerina puppet is real, and she does too. Even though Pinocchio is alive and sentient, and this puppet clearly is not.
It's being
And
controlled by.
It's being controlled
By
by
Minority Girl.
by Minority Report, and Minority Report. And so they're doing the puppet show, and it shows Minority Report like up on top of this wooden thing, like doing the puppets for the puppet show. And there are 2 other people there. We don't see those 2 other people at all.
Okay, well, let me finish the synopsis before we give over takes, because we can get into this specific
But
part.
yeah.
does
So
deserve
there's
a lot of
Minority Girl, and she
disposition.
talks to Pinocchio, and she wants to be a ballerina, but she's got a club foot. And
What was the point of that character?
I don't know.
She made me so angry.
Guys,
Literally,
wait.
she was a checkbox. She had no purpose.
I wanted to throw my laptop across the screen a couple times.
I
when she
need a
popped
button
up.
that just stops everybody.
No, this is important.
Okay, anyways, so I'm just going to race through it so that you guys can just dump on it. Okay, so same deal. He goes to Stromboli. Stromboli is not who he said he was. He captures him. He gets set free this time by Minority Report, and then he gets free. He is told now to go back to school. He goes and he realizes Geppetto's gone. No, he doesn't realize Geppetto gone. This is where he gets captured. Instead of actually making the decision to go with Honest John, this is a little different. He actually just kind of gets scooped up by the guy who runs
Pleasure Island guys.
and,
Satan.
and rather than it being like a
Who was
temptation,
Gaston as well.
rather than it being a temptation
And
thing,
Owen Shaw in Fast and Furious.
rather than it be a temptation thing, it's more of a peer pressure thing. Like he sings a song about this being about peer pressure, and the kids in the carriage sing the song like, "Hey, you should come because we all want you to."
They're literally
And-
driving there, and it was interesting because I was like, oh, so they're just forcing him to go. Like he's not choosing to go. And then Pinocchio's like, well, I'm not supposed to go to Pleasure Island. And so the guy stops the cart,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were a little bitch. And then sings the whole song about peer pressure. And the kids are like, we're gonna force you to do things you don't want to do because it's peer pressure. I'm like, are you listening, Pinocchio? Are you listening to the words they're singing? And then Pinocchio's like, so I guess I have to go. And so he goes, and it's like, did he really? Anyways,
So he goes to Pleasure Island, which is an incredibly nerfed version of Pleasure Island, rather than rather than drinking beer and smoking cigars and like
A&W.
and like beating each other up.
The devil,
They're
it's soda.
They're just drinking root beer, not
smashing
smoking
clocks.
and smashing clocks because it's like
Setting
this
off
is,
fireworks.
This is what kids love to do is smash clocks. So anyway, so they're here, they're doing all that stuff. And Pinocchio starts to turn into a jackass despite not doing any of the
anything.
things.
That was different. And you watch his facial expression, and especially the clocks being smashed. He's horrified the whole time. He's like, "Oh no, this is a bad place. I don't want to be here."
Yeah.
And he was kind of forced to be here, and he doesn't participate in anything. Like he has a mug of root beer, but never drinks any of it.
Yeah, and so it's
And then he turns into the jackass anyways.
and so okay,
guy.
and so he gets out of Pleasure Island. Same deal. He's told
Same deal.
He's told this time by a new introduced character, which is a seagull.
Remember, I was like,
In a song in a swamp. I was like,
PTSD.
So him and the seagull and Jiminy Cricket are like, hey, let's go find Geppetto. He's out in the middle of the water looking for you, and we've got to go look for him. And so they go to look for him. Then Minority Report comes back, and she's like, hey, do you just want to come and be famous again? Literally comes up to Pinocchio, and she's like, hey, remember all the things that you're supposed to do? Just go be famous again. And he goes, you know what? No. And she goes, I think that's the right answer. And then she leaves. It's just incredibly useless. I'm sorry. So then they turn themselves into a parasailing boat. Riddle me that one. And then they go after Geppetto. They find Geppetto, get eaten by Monstro. Same deal. They light a fire. They get out of Monstro. This time, instead of them being sneezed out, naturally what you would think, Pinocchio turns himself into a motorboat and he actually gets
Naturally.
out.
As one does.
And then they make it to shore. They crash. This time Geppetto is the one that's kind of like looking like he's dead. Pinocchio cries. It heals
Magic's him
Geppetto
back to life.
and that's the end of the movie. And it ends with a little like question mark because Jiminy Cricket is like, we don't know whether he turned into a real boy because Geppetto told him, hey, you know what? I was making you feel like you needed to be a real boy, which wasn't really the case. He didn't actually make him feel like that. I was making you feel like you needed a real boy, but you know what? A real boy couldn't turn himself into a motorboat. So you're actually just perfect the way you are. And it is what he says. And so he goes, you know what? You don't have to be a real boy. And then he walks away, and Jiminy Cricket's like, yeah, maybe he's not a real boy. And you can kind of slowly see him change into a real boy at the very end.
Yeah, and it leaves a kind of question mark.
It's supposed to be left up to like interpretation, whether like this is like happening or this is like just kind of what like is in the mind of Geppetto. Like, hey, you're real to me now. It doesn't matter.
A cliffhanger that rivals Inception.
I mean, as they're walking off, I do hear the
so
Does
now
it keep spinning?
Now that I've
Does it
said,
become a
now
real
I'll
boy?
give the synopsis.
Pinocchio's
Now,
feet keep spinning.
now I'll open up the floor to you guys.
I'd let you guys go first because I have a lot I need to
Nathaniel's
talk
gonna
about.
rant.
All right,
All right,
let's
Talk about the characters first.
Yeah,
Let's
talk
talk
about the characters.
let's talk about
Yeah.
like the cinematography specifically too.
Okay.
So, what did you guys think of like the variance between the way that Pinocchio looks and the way that Honest John looks? Because I feel like you look at Honest John and you're like, man, they did like a really good job creating him. Like there's so much detail in his
And-
face, and you look at Pinocchio, you're like,
also-
what the hell is that thing?
And what's interesting about that is it was Keegan-Michael Key.
Yeah.
He was giving he was hamming it up.
Yeah, he was good.
The man came in with 2 hams into the studio. That's how hamming it was. He was just bombastic, and it was exactly like Honest John should have been. So that part of the
he
movie
played that well.
was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to your point, Pinocchio.
What's up with that? Why was he so bad?
looks
But Honest
super
John was so
imposed.
good.
He looks super
To your
imposed the whole
viewers,
movie.
I want you to think: have you ever tried to carve something, like whittle something, like taking a knife and tried to carve a stick? You might notice that you don't get like nice, smooth.
I'm gonna guess most of them
rounded
have
edges.
it.
Most of them have it. But
Continue.
have you ever seen something that's been hand carved? It doesn't look like perfectly smooth.
Right.
Like you can sand it down, but usually it's a little rough.
I find
Pinocchio looked 3D printed.
This is the master Geppetto
probably a
we're
good
talking
example,
about,
yeah.
though.
And it's like he was pure CGI. What an opportunity to just make a damn puppet. It's not that complicated.
It's like there are lots of times that we make puppets of things that are supposed to be aliens or monsters, and this time it's like, what should we do to make this
Make
actual
this
puppet?
puppet
Like,
of a
I know
puppet,
what we can do. We can make it a CGI. thing.
Also, I'm wondering if any marionetters were watching this and just like tearing their hair out when the puppets keep doing these twirling things and the strings are just staying like they're doing this. They're not actually twirling. Like they would have been so mangled and tangled up knots. But
So I think
what really got me about Pinocchio was in the original, you see him painting on the facial features.
he paints on the smiles. The last thing he does, yeah.
He paints on the smile. Pinocchio looked like stickers.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like someone had taken stickers and just.
That's probably what they did.
It was bad.
No, well, it's CG, but Pinocchio looked absolutely atrocious. And for a movie about Pinocchio, him looking atrocious is a red flag.
Well, I'm gonna go out and say I think it might have looked better just to like Roger Rabbit it and just have like the animated Pinocchio be like
I think
Pinocchio
almost
in
anything would have been
Shrek
better.
looked infinitely better.
Yeah.
Pinocchio and Shrek looked really good.
And that's from 2001,
Yes.
22 years ago.
He had texture like in his face.
They couldn't call DreamWorks and be like, yo,
What'd you guys do?
Remember when you made fun of all of our characters that one time? Could you come do that because we're incompetent? Like, no. But that's a good place to start. What do you think visually? How do you feel about the movie? Other points, Jiminy Cricket, other things like that.
I will say it wasn't super dark, which was
That's true.
was
The,
nice.
the first scene was dark, but it was at night.
There
So
were,
whatever.
The
that's
night
fine.
scenes were
Yeah.
appropriately dark.
Sure.
I didn't have too much of a problem with those, but like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, they're all taking place in this weird, like Silent Hill fog.
Yeah.
You can't see anything.
Yeah,
And like it has to have been artificially darkened because the green screen was too bright or something like that. That's the only explanation because everything is like universally like I put on sunglasses.
Yeah.
And I hate it. I hate it.
Well, like when animating things, and the original Jurassic Park did this really well, which is like they had to animate the T-Rex, which were one of the first large digitally animated characters that interacted with live people. and they did such a good job because in most cases when they showed it, it was late at night and it was like covered in water and like the lighting.
That's different.
The lighting could be done really well as opposed to these movies being like, okay, we have to animate everything. Let's make sure everything's kind of dark and hard to see, and we might do a better job blending these things with live people.
But the darkness was never appropriate to the lighting of the scene.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree that it was done.
And maybe that's
horribly.
why they did it,
I'm
is to
just
make
saying.
it look less CG, but it looks worse overall. It's like a less pleasant viewing experience. I'd rather they go more like surrealist, and just make everything like super bright, super lurid, and it's okay if it's a cartoon, like almost like cel shaded, because that looks better than just putting everything in coffee.
Yeah.
I think it might have been a product of the lighting and also of Pinocchio being weird, but like I was like scared at the beginning. How it wouldn't have taken that much.
Just you, dude.
It wouldn't have taken that much to turn that into a
me.
horror film. It would have been like a couple beats that turns into a horror film.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Geppetto was like
Like
almost
if
all,
you
actually.
just see Pinocchio's shadow like over Geppetto's bed with a knife in his hand.
He had a tricycle and a saw.
Also, Geppetto was kind of scaring me in the beginning too. I got some bad vibes from Tom Hanks' version of Geppetto.
So
Tom Hanks' version of Geppetto, he couldn't decide whether he had an accident or not.
let's talk about Geppetto briefly. So we have Tom Hanks being Geppetto, and there's a fan theory that this is actually a connection to Castaway.
Oh my God.
And that he's
I made a Castaway joke. Is this a fan theory?
and that he's actually trying to recreate.
Did you turn my remark, my snide remark, into a fan
Will
theory?
Wilson in human form, and he's still crazy.
Yeah, he was crazy for sure.
Okay.
He was not like endearing.
Dude, you just have to look hard enough.
He was not endearing. He was a crazy like mad scientist.
Yeah, I'm dying, man.
Crazy old Maurice.
Crazy old Maurice.
So, Jiminy, he
was a
looked
horror
like
character.
He was straight out of Ants, like
Yeah,
the movie
yeah,
Ants.
yeah.
He looked exactly like that garbage CG movie Ants, which apparently I've heard Ants is a good movie.
Ants is
It's
a good
so
movie.
ugly, I can't watch it.
It is good.
It's just
actually.
Jiminy looked like
movie.
he was wearing a mask, which maybe that's what crickets actually look like. I don't think so. I've looked at a cricket. I don't think they got these weird mask things on their face. Someone maybe he was a locust. I don't think he's supposed to be a locust, but
He's a cricket.
You can wear-
You could wear
He
Jiminy's
was
face as
horrifying.
like a serial killer could wear that as like his mask.
Okay, you want to know the kicker? Maybe you didn't notice this. Jiminy Cricket had horrifying cricket mask head, human fingers and toes.
That's what I'm saying. It was just off-putting, man. It felt
Absolute
like a,
horror show.
Liam might be right. Now that we talk
felt
about it more,
like
it
made
was a
my
little
skin
off.
crawl a little bit.
Yeah, it
was
definitely
definitely
a little
icky.
off.
It was
It
just
seemed like
weird.
it shouldn't have been made.
Yeah, I just thought the variant, like I said, like the variance between what's the guy's name?
Geppetto.
Yeah, and everybody else was like so. I mean, obviously, he was real, but what's his name?
Honest John.
Honest John.
Honest
and
John.
everybody-
Honest
all
John
the
was-
characters.
yeah,
Honest
Right.
John was
I was
well
like,
animated.
It's just
Yeah.
like it's so weird to see a movie that like I said,
Now,
all the
I'm
CGI
wondering
is so much different.
Now I'm wondering if part of that is because Honest John only interacts with Pinocchio, who's also animated.
Right.
So his, it's an animation, whereas Pinocchio has to interact with real people, and so it looks, and everything else is around real people,
I don't
and so
know
it looks
though,
worse.
because Pinocchio looked like a sticker. Like he looked like a sticker that
He was
somebody
particularly
stuck,
bad.
He like it
You
stuck
peel him off the
yeah,
wall.
it was stuck onto the projector that we were watching Pinocchio on.
He's
And
one
I
of
was-
those,
and I was like, hey,
one of
take
those
that
big
sticker off.
3D sticker fat heads.
Fat
heads.
He was just a fat head.
All right, let's let the fish out of the bag. All right,
Oh,
what do we
okay.
think about
Okay.
Cleo as a character?
All right, so
They kept this-
We got to touch on this.
They kept the sexy eyes 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I didn't. Was she talking during the movie or
Okay, so
She was talking. Just had to listen.
subtlety?
This is what I have to say though. like you're going back and you're remaking Pinocchio, right? This is your job. You're like, hey, it's your job. Hey, you're gonna you're gonna remake Pinocchio. And he's like, okay, cool. Look, this is what I'm thinking. All right, we're gonna change
Donald
some
the
things.
intern.
We're gonna change some things. We're gonna do something. And then like, hey, what about like Figaro the cat? Like you want like a normal cat? Like no, she's got to be a fake too. It's like no. Well, in the original, she's just a cat. Like she's not like a super cat. She's not talking. Like no. We'll have her like as a CGI thing. Like all right, fine. And the goldfish.
Why is this conversation so seductive?
Yeah. Well,
Well,
yeah.
This
on
is
brand.
like the Disney
We all
bedroom.
know. We all
they're
know
all like
why.
they're going to sleep. Like, hey, Dave. Yeah, Harold. Hey, I'm gonna put you in charge of that. Okay, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I imagine like this CGI meeting, and then like the horny intern raises his hand. He's like, "I'll do Cleo. I'll do Cleo."
Guys, I got dibs on Cleo. No, trust me.
No, I got it. I got it.
But seriously, like how easy would it have been just to make Cleo a goldfish? Like just to be like, hey,
Okay,
Cleo
and
is actually going to be a real goldfish because in the animated one, she's just a real goldfish.
And the thing is, unlike Flounder, who has speaking lines, Cleo does not have speaking lines.
Like,
and you could
that's what I
even just
mean.
give her like a little more facial expression.
You don't even need that. She exists to only be a goldfish in the movie. She
She is a
she's
sex
more.
symbol, and
She's
don't
more.
you dare deny
She's
it.
more than that.
That's what you have to. You have to come to the conclusion that you're like, oh, even in the original, we were supposed to be like, damn.
Yeah.
I think if I was stuck in the middle of a belly of a whale, I might.
Oh my gosh, dude. Demonetized.
Classic Greg making out with fish.
Classic Greg,
What are you gonna do?
dude.
Okay, so you guys all
Takes it
talk
too
about
far.
Nala from
That's where we
like
draw the
how different is
line.
Nala from
Hey, at least we're making out with mammals.
Yeah, dude. That's like one
pervert.
step away.
You
Okay,
absolute
well, this is what I
horn
ask you.
dog.
Well, this is what I ask you. Did Nala actually kiss anybody, and did Cleo actually kiss anybody? One did, one didn't.
Keep digging that hole, buddy.
You haven't
Still
seen the
see it.
Snyder cut of Lion King.
We still see it down there.
Tell you what, it's R-rated for a reason.
All right, so let's talk more about the story and how it differed from
Let's
the
not.
original. Liam, look, Liam, I want to ask you from you.
Yeah,
Liam, tell me
Let's
about
not.
like
I
you
don't-
sent us a very
I
specific
hated
text.
it. I hated
You sent
it
us a
so
text.
much. It's just
with a word in it that I didn't understand. That
affront.
Steve-O had to explain to
Affront.
me.
You've never heard
To
the word
God.
affront before?
It's like a phrase. It's a
I
phrase.
mean, I
affront to God.
context clues.
Heard of it. Just didn't know what it
Context clues
Abomination.
led me to believe that. But
It
go
was
ahead and
just-
tell us what you thought.
I mean, I don't really know what else to say. I hated it. I thought Tom Hanks was phoning it in. He owed Robert Zemeckis, the director, a favor for giving him Forrest Gump, so he had to come back around.
Yeah,
and be like, yeah, I'll
that's
do
what
this
shocked
movie
me
for you.
is when I was like, wait, this was directed by Robert Zemeckis?
But, like-
that man, he must have. Here's my headcanon. Robert Zemeckis is dead, and that was his corpse they resurrected to direct.
Yeah,
And
just
someone else
stick
had
his
the
name
reins.
on it.
Yeah.
Well, who did Dumbo?
Kind of like they put Tom Clancy's name on stuff all the time.
Right.
Dumbo was Tim Burton.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
think it's the same thing.
There's,
I
like,
think
good
Disney has
involved with
killed. I think
these.
Disney has killed these men.
Yeah.
and they're like zombies. Like, but keep putting Tom Clancy's name on everything.
It's
That
really
man's
strange.
been dead for years.
Yeah.
I think that's what's
there's
going on.
good
here.
Disney waits for
directors tied to
famous
these.
directors to die.
It's
And
really- it's like
hey, their
Showtime.
last thing before they died, and nobody can correct them because nobody knows.
Just
They're like,
wait
maybe they
until
did.
Scorsese kicks
That's-
the bucket and he's going to do the next one.
Scorsese's going to direct the live action Aristocats.
Yeah. No, but on a real note, I think what we talked about with the live action before, how like it was just super fuzzy, the theme. At least I thought the theme was super fuzzy. This one seemed wildly inconsistent with like
Yes.
what Pinocchio knew and then what he like had to be told. Like it just there was no like rhyme or reason to like things he like inherently knew and then things that like he didn't. Like I
Yes.
just found
Was
no
that intentional,
consistency
though,
in it.
or no? You think that was intentional?
I don't know. Maybe,
okay.
but it just seemed like a weird choice if it was.
Yeah.
I didn't love the cliffhanger ending either. I thought that was dumb. But my real issue was a similar issue to the original was the theme, but the theme was just even worse and fuzzier this time around.
Yeah. So it's interesting because all the ones. Well, okay. So Aladdin live action was good, even if the first 20 minutes really let it down. Jungle Book live action was fine, even if I don't like the way they took the story. It was it was a reasonable place to take the story. I just prefer the original. So those are the two that have been on the positive side. Then Little Mermaid was like right on the border, but I think it goes under because of the
Little
way
Mermaid's
the
bad.
stupid ending they changed.
It's
And then
not
everything
Alan.
else has been bad. But everything's been bad. It's like a unique flavor of bad. It's like Bean Boozled. It's like, did they get dirty dishwasher or stinky feet? They're all terrible, but they're uniquely terrible in their own way. This one was terrible. So, like, Peter Pan and Wendy was terrible because of the toxic messaging in it, like the deliberate just poison they're trying to feed kids.
Yeah.
This was bad because the writers were so incompetent that they couldn't even remember what they had done from scene to scene.
Yeah.
This was one of the most incompetently written films that I have ever watched. And we watched some stinkers.
Oh yeah.
But every now and then we'll be watching a movie, Greg and I will be watching a movie, and I'll be like, wait a minute, did they establish that earlier? I did that like 9 times this movie.
Yeah.
Like 9 times. Now, I will say, there were a couple things in the movie that were really bothering me. And so I went and looked them up, and I was like, oh, okay, they actually did okay. And the reason here, okay, so here's what I looked up. So I actually had to look up. So what time do you, what is the time frame? Like when do you think, looking at the movie, because they don't say it in the movie, but it is on the Wikipedia page, just my half-ass research. What year or around what year do you think this movie takes place?
Like when you're looking at it.
Yeah.
In both of them, or did the live action?
Just the live action.
Well, I mean, it's
40s?
presumably the same. No, earlier than that.
Yeah. What time period does it seem like to you?
Like in the movie. What
Yeah.
are they trying
Like
to
in
do?
the movie, if you had to guess what calendar year it was, what year of our Lord was it? Just guess.
like
Just guess.
1500s.
1500s.
Yeah, 18s. I would say.
1800s.
1800s. Yeah, I same 1800s.
1800s, okay.
Early 1800s.
So the reason I looked this up, so it turns out it takes place in 1895 in Italy,
Italy.
which is a lot later than I thought it was.
Yeah,
The
I
reason I
thought
looked
early.
this up is because they make a reference about the Earth going around, or the sun going around the Earth.
Oh yeah.
And the Copernican revolution, I don't know if you know this, happened in the 1500s. So I was like, wait a minute. Are we talking, is this like 40, are we medieval? But then there are cuckoo clocks, which weren't invented until actually, apparently the cuckoo clock was like invented in the late 1600s. So that was a lot earlier than I thought it was.
Well, good for them.
And the steam engine, steam power has actually been around since like Roman times. But, by 1895, the technology was appropriate for the time. So that was actually correct. But because they talked about the sun going around the Earth, I got all confused about what time it was supposed to be. In 1895, zero people had any belief that the sun went around the Earth. There's no geocentrism in 1895. But I was surprised that everything else was right. But okay, so here's one factoid that I found that I thought was fascinating. So it's 1895. It's a small town in Italy. I don't know if you've been to a small town in any country. The population is usually pretty homogeneous. There are a lot of African Americans.
Are there now?
Because honestly, let's be honest, they're not African Italians. They're African Americans walking around. In the school teacher was one, which I was like, oh, diverse school teacher kicked out a wooden puppet. But here's a really interesting fact about 1895. In 1895, Italy was at war with Ethiopia. And I don't know if you guys know how populations tend to treat people who look like the people you're at war with.
Yeah, I think we're aware.
Whoopsie! You picked the wrong year for that.
There's no world where the writers would ever think about that.
Yeah,
and even if they
absolutely
did,
not.
they're just like,
I just thought that
they don't
find
care.
that fascinating. It was like, how
It is
could you
very
get
fascinating.
you got this so backwards because you're so convinced that a town has to have 6 black people and 5 Asian people and 32 Hispanic
This is
people
the
and
most
1
diverse-
white person. It has to be like the
diverse
most.
Italian town I've
Everything
ever
has to
seen.
look like Los Angeles, and it's like, okay, Rings of Power showed us that breaks the world building because one of the ways you show that someone is from a location, especially in a fantasy world, but it's Italy, so you expect to see Italian people. Have you ever seen Italians? They're not exactly the darkest
not
skinned
Asians.
people. Yeah. They're not Asian. They're not Hispanic.
It's the craziest
they're
thing
not
I've ever
black.
heard.
It's wild, right? Now you have if you live close to the coast, you'll be darker skinned, more
They all
tanned,
look like
right?
Liam. Of course.
Yeah. Every single Italian, men and women alike, every single Italian
It
looks
should have
like
just
this.
been Liam.
good
We have a
looking
picture
bunch.
of Liam too.
Good looking bunch over there, if I say so myself.
They all look like this.
We all
What
look
do
so
you-
good.
what do you-
We're all 11 out of 10. It's a curse. It's a blessing and a curse.
On the basis of Italy, I thought it was funny that Jiminy Cricket sounded like he's from the deep south.
Well, that's the thing.
He sounded
That's
like
why I
he's
think
from,
I feel like that's why
Missouri.
I feel like the voice is modeled off of Jimmy Stewart. And in fact, in the Puss in Boots' Last Wish, they have a Jiminy Cricket character, and he literally is Jimmy Stewart. It just has the Jimmy Stewart voice.
funny.
That's a great movie, by the way.
Steve said it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, right? That
Yes,
plays
it
this.
is. I was just gonna say, I would
Was
have
it
paid
really?
you.
Yeah,
I would
it
have
was.
paid you guys money if you guys knew that without
Yeah.
looking it up.
Yeah, Steve had
Yeah,
to
I
tell
was
me.
looking at
I
zero.
did
There's
not.
no shot.
Zero shots.
Keegan Michael Key is the only voice I recognized.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize any of the actors. Oh, Tom Hanks, but I didn't recognize anyone. The Black Fairy.
Yeah. That's you were smiling at me, but we thought the same exact
He said
thing.
the blue fairy,
We
and
thought
I
the
looked at
same
Liam,
exact thing.
which is fine, right? I
There
mean,
was
she's
an
a
e-
fairy.
there was an easy
Who
joke
cares?
there.
But man, if you didn't pick the most bland, she was the most bland, disinterested looking person.
Yeah,
She seems dead on the inside.
She
Yeah,
was
that
just
rules.
cashing that paycheck.
Yeah.
there was no you wouldn't cross.
She worked 12 hours on that movie
Yeah,
total, and she went
Yeah,
home.
right, and cashed $100,000
Yeah.
check.
There
No
was
question.
There
in
was
my
no
mind.
doubt in my mind though. I was like, here comes the blue fairy. I'm like, guaranteed she's just the most ethnic looking
course.
minority character you've ever seen in here.
Really, I thought she looked very generic.
Yeah.
What?
Very generic.
Can we explore what the point of if you want to go on a different
Minority
tangent?
Report.
Yeah. Let's talk
no,
about Minority
I
Report.
was very.
Before we get there, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, maybe I missed something, but what was the point of the seagull? Did the seagull provide value in the slightest?
No. Okay. So
the seagull provided exactly one usage, and that was to tell them that Monstro and to get him to Monstro. Which,
Sweet. That's what I thought.
incidentally, when they get to that point, and she's like, "Oh, you're too heavy. I can't carry you. So I'll drag you water skiing instead." I don't know if you've ever dragged your arm through the water. It's a little harder than just waving it through the air. So like.
That was a strange thing.
It made no sense.
No,
Like,
none of it
that'll
made
seem made no
But
sense
so
at
to go
all.
back to the writers forgetting what they wrote. So when the Blue Fairy brings Pinocchio to life, and she mentions what temptation is,
Yeah.
and Jiminy, the word temptation does not come out of his mouth.
Yeah, she says,
And then
stay away from
later,
things like temptation.
when he's being tempted to go to school by Honest John, Jiminy says, "Remember what I told you about temptation?" And I'm like, "Wait, you didn't say anything about temptation. The Blue Fairy did. You said nothing." So the writers forgot who said the dialogue in which scene. And then at the end, when Geppetto's like, "I'm sorry, I pushed you to be a real boy and I didn't." When did that happen? That
Yeah,
literally
never
never happened in the entire movie. Like Geppetto and Pinocchio are not in that many scenes together. It's basically they dance around, they're super happy,
And then that's it.
And then Pinocchio goes to school, and then shenanigans, and then they're reunited at the end. And then Geppetto's like, "I love you just the way you are because you're a motorboat and you're useful." So very utilitarian, like
got a V8
you're very
engine.
useful to me as a wooden boy. Very Stromboli-esque, like, "Hey, you're more useful this way." It's like, okay. But it was like but Geppetto never intimated that he didn't think Pinocchio was a real boy or was good enough or anything like that.
Yeah, he was
Maybe there was a
extremely
scene
happy.
missing.
No,
Yeah,
he was
probably.
like, he was overjoyed.
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh my gosh, my wish came true. You're real." He's dancing, and then it was Pinocchio that looked at him and he said, "No, I'm not real yet. But I can be if I do the right things." He's like explaining.
And
what the
Geppetto's
Blue
like,
Fairy
"Oh,
told
well,
him."
that's great,
And then
so let's do that.
And then Geppetto, it's like a comical scene. He looks around and he goes, "Oh, well, almost a real boy, hooray!" And so you have Pinocchio informing Geppetto that he's not real,
and
and
if-
then you have Geppetto apologizing at the end that he's like, "I shouldn't have made you feel anything less than what you actually are."
And
I'm
like,
what
but
a
you didn't.
stupid mess.
You're right. You didn't do that though. So like,
I don't have an opinion about anything.
And it's like, okay. So here's the thing though. Oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. Right. It feels like they were trying to set it up as though Geppetto was treating Pinocchio as a replacement for his son who died.
Yes, that was absolutely.
and
That
then
was
they
supposed
forgot.
to be the story beat, and they forgot to actually establish that because the only thing you get is him making Pinocchio, and then he looks wistfully at a photo.
And he goes,
That's it.
Right.
Yeah, that's all you have.
And then he makes the wish.
So strange.
Yep.
So
that's it.
disconjointed. It's
It's-
like so disjointed. I wonder if they when did this come out? 2022.
2022.
They write it during COVID, and they had like a bunch
Maybe-
of writers, and they said, "Send
It
in your
feels
stuff."
some of it feels
and we'll
like
take it,
telephone
we'll go
game.
like this.
One guy just put it together and was like-
God! Hey, I got great news. Apparently, so the writer strike's now over.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, they got writer minimums because you know what you need: a minimum number of writers. you don't want to do the minimum possible number of
Yeah.
writers. Right? You want to say, hey, maybe we have one creative lead and like 2 or 3 people for them to bounce off. Right? Maybe you have one person who's really good at this type of scene, one person who's really good at this type of scene. You have them just work together to make sure that everything works right. You say, no. If you're making a 20-episode series, you need 6 writers.
Too many
It's like-
cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly.
No,
nah. We want to get paid. And
Never
you know what's
heard
going to
of it.
happen?
Let's get more
all
cooks.
the streaming services are going to be like, okay, well, everything's 5 episodes now.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna touch super briefly. Well, super briefly is relative, but I'm gonna talk about the ways that this movie screwed up in terms of imagery. So the original, you have characters being inanimate, like animals, right? Certain characters are certain animals, but you also have like Pinocchio is a wooden boy, and all these other things, and it's very obvious, right? So you have Jiminy Cricket, who's the conscience. And what animal is he? He's a cricket, and what do crickets do? They chirp. They constantly
Make noise.
annoy you. They're always there, right? Similar to a conscience. Like he's taking place of the conscience, and therefore he is a cricket. Like that's the idea, is that he's constantly in his head. He's constantly there, like nagging him. Hey, I'm your conscience. I'm here. And you have the boys who act stupid. What do? They turn into donkeys.
Well, I will say.
You have the wily.
I will say, this is the one time. I don't think it worked as well in Peter Pan, but I think it worked here where it wasn't just boys, it was girls too. Because I'm like, I've worked with kids a lot. Little girls can also be horrible people. So, you know what? I'll give them that.
in the
Now,
live
I don't
action
think they
remake?
did it on purpose. Yeah, I don't think they were just like, oh, this needs to be more diverse.
Right.
But they unintentionally sent a good message, which is kids are just bad.
Right. So, but and then you also have like the conniving character being like a fox, which is like as far as
on the
like,
nose.
yeah,
Pretty
Pretty on the
classical.
nose.
Yeah.
and then you have Pinocchio being like the whole theme for him is that, hey, you're an animated puppet right now, but really what it means to be real isn't the way you look, isn't the way you act, isn't the fact that you're pretty much a real person. It's actually the things that you do. If you act on the inside like an animal in this world, in the Pinocchio world, you'll become that animal. The guy who constantly connives people and tricks them has become a fox. The person who is constantly sitting there and chirping in your ear is become a cricket, right? Like so we have Pinocchio, who starts off as an empty, hollow vessel, being like, I need to be filled with something, and it's like, hey, make the right choices, and you'll actually become a real boy, as opposed to like what the world offers, which is all these different things. So you have the new one, not grasping that at all. The new one just literally being like, oh, he's wood. Let's let people walk around and be like, teachers like, hey, you can't be here.
A lot of Pine jokes. There's a Chris Pine joke in there.
Yeah, that one made me roll my eyes.
And so basically they lose that theme at all, and they run with it at the beginning, and then they're like, hey, yeah, you need to become a real boy by making the right decisions. And by the end, he's like, you know what? Forget being a real boy. You're a wooden boy, and you can turn into a motorboat, and that's all. Like, and it's so dumb because you're like, the only reason he's an actual wooden boy in this asinine world is for the imagery of the fact that he's wood. It's not really supposed to be addressed, right? It's not like, you know what, you're a talking fox, and that's pretty freaking cool, and like you should go. It's like, no, the imagery is that he's a fox because he's conniving people. Yep. It's not like, oh my gosh,
they don't say, oh, you turned into a donkey, and that's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they have human beings turning into donkeys, and nobody's like, holy shit.
And smoke monsters.
What is going on? They're just like, oh, hey, look. This is what happens.
Monstro had Kraken tentacles for some reason.
Yeah, Monstro in the live action was like
Cthulhu Monstro.
He was the Kraken for sure. Like you literally had Liam Neeson pop up and he was like, release the Monstro.
I just came up with a brilliant headcanon.
Okay, let's hear it.
That the people around Pinocchio represent the 7 deadly sins. Geppetto is pride, trying to create life. Cleo is obviously lust.
Damn.
Of course.
Damn.
We know it's a hot
Who's
fish.
that? Did they name the guy Satan? I'm just gonna call him Satan.
So he's called the coachman.
The coachman.
Like his technical name.
He's gluttony, right? Takes him to Pleasure Island. Gluttony. Honest John is envy. Like, oh, think of all the fame you could have if you just go and grab it.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm missing some sense. How many was that?
Stromboli.
Gluttony.
What's Stromboli?
Stromboli is sloth. He doesn't want to do any work.
And he's fat.
He's fat. He's lazy, and he's like, oh, a puppet without strings. I don't have to manipulate the puppet anymore. This is the easiest money I've ever made in my life. Yeah. And how many is that? So sloth, gluttony,
5.
envy. So I'm missing wrath, and I'm missing
War or like death. There's a violent one. There's another violent one.
the 4 horsemen.
War.
So pride, envy, sloth, gluttony, wrath, lust, and what was the last one?
Steve,
how come I can only think of
Liam? You love the movie Seven, guys.
Yeah,
I know I do.
Chat. If you're watching, chat. What is the 7th deadly sin?
Greed, envy, lust, pride, sloth, wrath, and obviously Monstro represents wrath. That's obvious.
Yeah,
Wait, greed.
Greed, greed, pride, greed, gluttony.
Creed the band is also
gluttony.
Is also
No, Creed
sloth.
the band rules.
Oh yeah, greed. Okay. No, greed is the one I'm forgetting.
Yeah, greed.
Pride, greed, gluttony, sloth.
Greg is
wrath,
heavy-handed
lust,
with that horn today. It's all
I actually do like Creed.
Yeah.
Creed rules, man.
And
Sorry, what was the last
Creed
7th?
slander.
What was the 7th deadly sin?
Greed, right? We didn't.
yeah,
No.
maybe Stromboli's greed
Creed.
and Jimny's sloth.
No, we already said. Oh wait, no, we said envy. Okay,
Yeah, maybe Jiminy is sloth because he sleeps on the first day.
Jimmy's all of them.
Jiminy,
all 7 of
Jiminy
them.
is all. He's ascended to super sin.
Yeah, it's like Thanos
the whole,
for
the whole
deadly
point
sin.
is like we can sit here and do this all day, and it's actually kind of fun. Like you can do stuff like that. We can make Christian implications, and I always find that fascinating. But in reality, they took a movie that had very clear, basic imagery.
But yeah, and even if I think they could have made those images sharper, let's go through. Okay, original. He should go to school, and he doesn't.
Right.
He should not go to Pleasure Island, and he does. He chooses to go to Pleasure Island. He chooses to indulge in Pleasure Island.
Right.
And then the turning point is he chooses to go save his dad from Monstro.
Right.
Okay. Pretty cut and dried. Couple major events.
Right.
In the new one, he chooses to go to school. He gets kicked out. So he's like, oh no, what do I do? And so Honest John grabs him and is like, okay, we're going to the circus. So he doesn't really choose that.
Right.
Arguably, he chooses to go to Pleasure Island, but not really. they kind of rope him into it.
And then when he's at Pleasure Island,
he doesn't
do
partake
anything.
in
so
anything.
why is he turning into a donkey?
Why is he turning into a donkey? He does nothing wrong. Pinocchio has never done anything wrong.
He's never done anything
ever.
wrong ever in his
Ever.
whole life. Ask anyone; they'll tell you he was the greatest puppet ever. He's
I
just,
know
You
this.
sound like
I know
Christopher
this.
Walken.
Is that
No,
because, like,
it's Parks and Rec. It's one of the terrible characters. I have never done anything wrong ever. I know this, and I love you.
Liam, do a Joe Biden talking about Pinocchio.
Come on, man. Look, man.
All right,
Starts
but
walking like a Roomba.
is being on Pleasure Island, you think, like, obviously he starts to turn into a donkey. Is that, you know, like, you become who you surround yourself with? I mean, that's kind of the underlying.
maybe that, and they
they
sing
sing
the
the
whole
song.
song about peer pressure,
Right.
But at the same time, it's like he clearly didn't want to go,
Yep.
and he didn't do any of the things, and so it's like guilty by association. Seems a little unfair of whatever demonic power is turning people into
Yep.
donkeys.
Yeah. I don't know, just the way yeah.
But like it was just so aimless because at one point you think because he's with Stromboli, he's locked in a cage, and then you meet this new character, which is Minority Report, and she has to be good because she's disabled and a minority, and so you're like, okay, well you're good, I can trust you, and so she's talking to him, and she's like, hey, listen, you know, like I'm eventually going to get out here and become a ballerina myself, even though I'm disabled, I'm going to do it because I believe. And he's like, oh my gosh, that sounds great, and he tells Jiminy, hey, I met this person, and they told me some things, and Jiminy's like, hey, you know what? I guess some other people can give good advice too, even though they're your peers. And I'm thinking, okay, this movie's going to catch and run with the idea that like your peers have like they know you better than your parents and listen to them. And then he just forgets about her. She comes by later and she represents temptation, and she's like, "Hey, come back to the circus." And he's like, "Yeah, no." And she's like, "Yeah, good
Dude,
call."
that scene,
Let's-
is that the scene where,
let's go
where
back.
he hears footsteps?
Yeah.
That made me want to take my laptop and snap it in half when like the marionette comes down. It's like, hey.
I knew it was her the whole
I
time.
was, oh my.
Yeah, that was so obvious.
You heard her clanking around.
You
With
did.
her
I heard
fake
the song.
leg.
Okay, so let's talk
was
about
hoping it
Minority
wasn't.
Report and what purpose she serves in the story. So, he goes to Stromboli's and he meets her.
Right.
And again, there are two other people that are working the puppets. You don't see them. It's very strange.
It's
They
supposed
just
to be her family.
yeah, her family, whatever that means.
Yeah,
They're just there. And so I guess the implication is that Stromboli is abusing them, but it's unclear how.
Unclear.
It's unclear. And so it's funny because she's like, oh, you know, she's got like a leg brace. So there's clearly something wrong with her leg, but other than her clomping around, we see her doing like plies and twirls on the stump leg. So
Like she's incredible.
yeah, like she's just doing perfect ballet stuff with her handicap already. So it's like she's like, well, one day I'll become a ballerina. Like, but you can already do all the stuff despite your handicap. So clearly you're a better ballerina than any actual ballerina because they don't have half a leg.
Mm-hmm.
So like I didn't. The handicap meant nothing to the character. We never saw her actually struggle because of her handicap. It was just there. Again, she's literally just a checkbox. She's literally just a
she
checkbox.
served no and it wasn't like one of those things where there was a purpose they were trying to serve, and I say that's a dumb reason, so you serve no purpose. They literally forgot why she was like, hey, we're going to introduce you as a good character who helps the character grow, right? She realizes that Pinocchio doesn't trust anybody now, and so now she speaks to Pinocchio through her marionette, and she's like, hey, Pinocchio, I'm so-and-so, I'm just like you, and he's like, oh my gosh, I can trust you, yeah, let's go. And then later she comes back with the marionette, and she's like, come with me to the circus, you'll be headline the show, which is exactly what Stromboli said. And he goes, you know what, no, I need to go save my dad. And she goes, I think that's a good choice.
That was a
finally made
test.
the right. That was it. And I'm like,
Okay.
what in the world
So-
are you? What? Like,
Let's talk about the middle scene where Stromboli's thrown him in the cage and hung the key on the wall. Minority
Oh,
Report
yes.
opens the top and looks in and is like, oh, you know, does the you can trust people. But then Stromboli comes back in and scares her off and closes and latches the top so she can't help.
Right.
Jiminy shows up, and that's when they find out, like, oh, when Pinocchio lies, his nose grows. Yep. And so Jiminy's like, oh, just
Here we
keep
go.
lying.
That was brutal.
Gets his nose over to the ring and manages to bring it back. And so in the original, the Blue Fairy comes and rescues him and says, hey, this is the one time I'm going to rescue you, but you need to figure this stuff out on your own and make the right decisions from now on. Okay, which makes sense. Like Pinocchio didn't know what was going on. He found out, oh, if I lie, my nose gets bigger, which only comes into play once, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I thought it was way more.
Yeah.
I was expecting way
it's
more.
the thing that
yeah.
everyone associates with it, but it's
Right.
only that one part in the
Right.
movie, and
Yeah.
it really doesn't play into anything
Pretty
else. but-
minuscule. Yeah, there's no greater.
It's just it's just like a moral lesson of, you know, it's Pinocchio symbolizing like when you lie, you keep adding on lies and lies, and it becomes more and more obvious to everyone who's around you. So it's like a good moral lesson and tied in a nicely visual bow, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas in this one, he lies and lies and lies, and the implication is, hey, if you tell the right lies, it'll help you out when you
benefits
need it.
you, yeah.
It benefits you. I'm like, that's the worst possible lesson you can teach.
Yeah.
Is that, oh, normally lying's bad. However, if it gets you out of a bad situation, then it's okay.
Right.
Like,
Go and
that's
lie,
not.
kids.
Hey, kids, don't lie to me unless you think it might get you out of trouble.
I'm glad you brought that up because I thought the same thing at the time.
I was like, you just completely flipped the
Defeats
moral
purpose,
message.
yeah, of
The
everything.
exact opposite. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think that
Holy.
this is the furthest as far as like the messaging goes.
It's
like where you have the original being.
yeah, it's like
again,
this and
a
Peter
very
Pan and Wendy have just been almost complete inversions of the reason for the original movie.
Maybe it's incompetence. Maybe there's something sinister
I think so.
at foot.
With Peter Pan and Wendy, I think it was 100% intentional. Like the writing's not bad in the sense of poor writing. It's bad in the sense of intentionally flipping whatever the message was to be anti-mother.
Right.
Which is so weird because then they try to play on the, oh, but she's going to show us what a mother's like. And she's like, oh, mother's all these wonderful things. No, why would I want to be a mother?
Yeah.
You think I need to be a mother? You Greg, you patriarchal, misogynistic pig.
Speaking of patriarchal misogynist pigs, we got a letter from
Oh, we got a letter
Jakob.
from Jakob.
Oh, he wrote. So wait, which one did he watch? Did you watch both?
He watched both of them.
Oh,
yeah, he watches
good for
all.
Jakob.
He watches both every time.
I'm pretty sure there were a couple movies where he said he clearly didn't watch them, but
Yeah,
okay.
that's true. Actually, did he write? He didn't write it in last week, did he? He only watches it when I'm on.
No. He didn't write it.
Do we want Steve-O to read this one?
Steve, why don't you go ahead and read it? So we have a buddy named Jakob.
Okay.
He's a distant friend. Sometimes it helps to read it in his native tongue, which is
Vaguely
American
Eastern
German.
Eastern European.
Eastern European.
Oh, okay.
You can
He
take it how you
comes
will.
from the country of vaguely Eastern Europe.
This is the letter from Jakob.
So if you want, why don't you hit us with the letter from Jakob?
What does Jakob have to say?
Who is this Steve-O? Why no invite for Jakob still? Afraid of your male insecurities being exposed by a true movie connoisseur like myself?
Is Jakob not a man?
Pinocchio, eh? Pleasure Island?
You gotta read it.
You got to read it.
Epstein called. He wants his premise back.
Yo, we are so canceled.
I enjoyed both movies, but especially the live action. I think the original focuses too much on how education is necessary for a child and how actors are dredges of society. It is the opposite. The theater is the lifeblood of America, and teachers are the armpits.
Oh my God.
Education system. I'm like reading ahead just to make sure. It's like,
Yeah, there's nothing like egregious.
yeah. I'm like, that's why I'm going a little slow. Education
There
system
are no
for
slurs in there.
for a child is like the idea of the Republican Party, archaic and triggering. Also, screw what Nathanael said about the Black Fairy.
Okay, yeah.
Was he listening live?
Apparently.
That's what I'm kind of.
Oh man.
That's incredible, honestly.
Is this like
Oh my gosh.
Is this like Tom Riddle's diary, where Jakob's been dead for years and years, and we're just like
haven't seen
accessing
Jakob in a
his
while,
Horcrux?
Do you guys know this guy in real life?
Yeah, we know Jakob.
We know Jakob,
He
yeah.
sucks, dude.
Okay.
He sucks.
Where's he
Jakob,
from,
honestly.
dude? See?
I don't. He's
from vaguely
um,
Eastern Europa. It's a real country. Look it
He
up.
actually sucks at volleyball.
I don't know why we give him airtime every time on this podcast.
Well,
How funny would it be if I gave Steve-O just the most egregious like slur?
Oh, but that's not Jakob wouldn't say that though.
That's true. Yeah, Jakob's very left leaning.
On top of just being an absolute idiot, Jakob
Has terrible
actually
taste in
he actually
movies.
donates to the show a hefty sum.
Yeah.
That's-
I guess
the
that's why we give him
the reason
airtime.
why it's a weird this is weird
love-hate
toxic
relationship for
parasitic
sure.
relationship where he bankrolls the entire thing and yet call us like absolute dumbasses
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
But
These
hey,
mics are
you know
nice,
what?
Jakob.
His,
Well
his
done
money's
with these,
going into
man.
our pockets, so you know what? Joke's on him.
So we'll give him 5 minutes every other week. Whatever, man.
Thanks, Jakob, for nothing.
It sucks.
You guy sucks. I hate that guy. So all in all, overall thoughts of both the live action, the
Again,
animated remake. What are your thoughts?
Original
Nathaniel?
an animated remake. The original,
Yeah, I say
I
that
think
wrong every time.
is fine. Maybe like a 6 out of 10 for me. maybe a 5 out of 10. I wouldn't rush back to see it again.
Okay.
I thought the animation was nice. I liked it. I thought the story could have been sharper, better told. And again, I think you have things from around the same time period that have better told stories. So I don't think it's a time period issue.
Yeah, I can agree.
Yeah, I think it's like a mid movie.
Yeah.
It's mid.
It's very mid for me. It's not offensively bad. Cleo, too damn sexy. Can't get over that. That's definitely bumping it up for me. So I would say I haven't mentioned this. The only part about the live action Pinocchio that was actually good, maybe I mentioned this before the podcast, was all the different cuckoo clocks were referencing other animated movies.
Cool.
Was a nice touch, except for they were all CGI. And again, you could have had a really cool thing where you made all the real ones. And then if you make all those real cuckoo clocks, then you sell those. Like, I would buy one of those. I mean, I wouldn't because it'd be like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
You watch the pitch meeting for it, and he's just like, so we go to Geppetto, and he actually makes CGI puppets, and then he makes CGI clocks and all the CGI clocks. So, anyways, go ahead. So your thoughts on the live
The live action just anything you could have liked about Pinocchio, it takes and completely nullifies it, just completely neutralizes it, turns it upside down, makes no sense. It's so poorly written. And, the indication of this is it got a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, a site that is notorious for giving good reviews to bad movies. And even this one is too bad for Rotten Tomatoes.
Yep.
So that's what tells you. If Rotten Tomatoes gives a movie that you're like, this is a bad movie, and it's bad on Rotten Tomatoes, it's probably a bad movie. So it's just an atrocity. It's literally not worth any second of your time. The only thing you could ever do is maybe if you wanted to watch the Honest John scenes, which is like 5 minutes of the movie.
You put that on YouTube
you could,
or something.
Watch that on YouTube because Keegan-Michael Key absolutely kills it. That is the only redeemable part of that movie. Maybe watch the intro for the cuckoo clocks and be like, it's the Lilo and Stitch clock. It's the Woody clock. It's the other one. They kept the naked butt boy getting spanked. Of course. So kept all the butt stuff.
Love butt stuff.
They love butt stuff. But yeah, it's just nothing worthwhile about this movie. It's just a completely useless piece of garbage.
Yep.
Liam, hear it.
It's in the tier of Peter Pan and Dumbo.
Original, you're saying?
I'd say both probably. Both are in their respective tiers.
Okay.
So like Pinocchio's in the tier of the originals. I feel like they've gotten worse as we've done these episodes. Like I feel like we started out with some good
strong.
ones, and then I've missed two good ones.
Yeah, you did.
I missed Jungle Book and Aladdin.
Oh, those were too good.
So my
and those ones, the live actions were actually decent.
My axis, my graph has just been.
Liam's
you guys
actually
like
been
the
getting
live action?
Liam has
Live
actually
live
been
action
getting
line.
depressed.
Okay, the first 20 minutes are atrocious because when it's doing the Street Rat song, you're like, it's just awful. It's just awful. There's no other way to describe it. It's an abomination. That part of the movie should be cut out. But as soon as Genie comes in, it turns into Arabian Hitch.
Yep.
And it's great.
And
then, of course, that we talked about Jasmine's song, which is ridiculous. But
Terrible.
It's
Yeah,
terrible.
terrible.
It's terrible. Like, and the fact
It
that
was
she's-
entertaining though. You could watch it and be like,
and
"Oh,
the
this
fact she's
is
like,
cool." Okay.
No one's gonna keep me speechless. Okay, first of all, no one is keeping you speechless. Second of all, you're saying this in your head, so you're not saying anything. You're thinking, you can't keep me speechless as you sit there not saying anything.
Yeah.
And then literally the only person who tells you to not talk is the bad guy.
He tells everybody not to
Who
talk.
tells everyone to not talk. He basically, like, the bad guy, whose name I think was Greg, says, yeah, get back in the kitchen where you belong. So,
Sounds about right.
But
it's like no one, the Sultan is like, whatever you want, honey, you do you. Right? I love you.
And to be clear, like we still like the originals better. Like,
Oh,
the
yeah,
original
absolutely.
Aladdin
No
is
question about
hands
that.
down
Yeah.
better.
Yeah,
That's
no,
not-
the
we were just
Aladdin
saying,
remake is like maybe a 6.5, 7.
Yes.
Yep.
We're
The
just,
original is a 10.
yes. Yeah. It's like it's just in comparison mainly to other live actions
action.
that
No,
were
that
like,
was near the top.
That were
No
that
doubt.
were like
Yeah.
these are dumpster fires,
Yeah.
and they were like that one had something to offer
Jungle
that the
Book and
original
Aladdin-
may not have because you had Will Smith just being Hitch, and you didn't have that in the original.
Yep.
The original's still better, but that's something that it offered that didn't destroy the original. That was solid. So you're like,
Yeah.
this is cool. Like the middle part where he's like trying to sell her by
was
like
great.
with like the
With the
jams. He's like,
jams, yeah.
we have many expensive jams. He's like, get away from the jams. And he's like, we have very like that part's funny.
Jellies.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
like,
good.
it's
It was
goofy.
good. And the Aladdin and the
Jungle
guy,
Book had similar
yeah, the guy who played Aladdin and the guy who played Genie, Will Smith, had great chemistry. They did a great job.
So, anyways, Liam, sorry, continue.
But
with
so like Aladdin and Jungle Book, we were like, okay, we could watch those again.
Right.
I think
yeah, agreed.
it goes without saying that we went on this journey of the Disney live action versus original, and we discovered what we knew we would, which not a
They
single
are who
one
we
of them.
thought they were.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Not a single one of them is the original worse than the live action, or even close.
Not even
It's not. Yeah, it's night and
Right.
day. It's
So,
night and
like,
day.
if you were to rank, if we were going to do our rankings, it would be all the live action in whatever order, and then all the original in whatever order. Would
Absolutely.
you guys say there's any? So obviously, compared to its,
Well, you were the only
equal-
one that had something controversial to say about this because you, with the live action Peter Pan, you said it might be underneath one of the live action, like
You're right.
Beauty and the Beast or something awful.
That's what
like
I was going
that.
to say. Is like obviously, I don't think of
I
its
disagree with
equal. The original is worse than live action, but I might put some originals lower than
See,
other
I
live
can't
action.
think
if
of-
that
I-
makes sense.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I might watch live action Aladdin or live action Jungle Book before I would want to watch Dumbo or Pinocchio again.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting thing.
That'd be close. It'd be a close call though, because again, the only problem with that is that if I were to watch Aladdin again, I would just want to watch the original.
Of course.
But if someone was like, "Hey, you have to choose between
Right.
original Pinocchio and live action Aladdin," I might pick live action Aladdin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
Just
just
from an entertainment standpoint.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just to for the audience, we will be having a rankings
Yeah.
episode
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
we are done with this.
So we've got,
and to keep the audience up to date, we have three
More movies: Cinderella,
Three more
Lady and the
movies.
Tramp, and Mulan. We're doing them in that order.
Are we
Yes.
gonna pick the next one?
No, we're doing them in that order because Cinderella's supposed to be good. So we're giving ourselves a break. We're
say
going
it
to do a
again.
good
Cinderella.
one, Cinderella, then Lady and the Tramp.
And
Which,
then-
okay, again, Steve, I'm going to ask you this question because I'm asking everyone this question.
Yes.
Name a single scene from Lady and the Tramp other than the spaghetti scene.
that's it, dude. That's all I got.
I asked my
It's
brother.
the whole movie.
I asked my brother, and he was like, "Oh, there was this scene and this scene and this scene," and then he stops and he's like, "Wait, that might have been Oliver and Company." Like, right? It's such a. I can't think of anything other than the
No.
spaghetti scene. So I actually think it'll be interesting to see like
That's funny.
what else is in the
I have
movie.
no
I
idea what
legitimately
the
don't
plot
know.
is. Yeah, none.
So last thoughts on
Some
Pinocchio's, Liam. Was that it?
No, that was it.
Okay.
That was it.
Shrek 2 was better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I,
for sure.
I similar thoughts. I thought the original was one of the lower ones. I still enjoyed it. I think that all of these Disney animated ones, despite whether
wasn't unenjoyable.
despite whether they're like high entertainment value, you can at least grasp like a message that is like wholesome. Because like at least messages that are like, hey,
part of that is that the original source material were, fairy tales, fables, things like that are intended to teach moral lessons to kids.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, admittedly, again, this is going back to sensibilities from when we're alive now, where we're very statistically unlikely to die day to day, versus the 1700s, where you're statistically much more likely to die day to day. Where it's like, oh yeah, and so they chop the evil stepsisters chop their feet off to fit their like horrible things that kids probably wouldn't have thought it were quite as horrible or grisly, because they're like, oh yeah, I did that.
Yeah, I got a relative that
Makes sense.
happened to.
So,
But for me, I can still watch those originals and be like, oh, like it's kind of a goofy looking movie. Like, there's some parts that made me laugh. Like Jiminy Cricket had some goofy parts in the original. And overall, I can say, oh, this is a cleanish message that I'm like, okay, this is generally what it's saying. It's
Sure.
you can grasp this as a kid,
Sure,
and as an
I
adult, you
think
can appreciate like the imagery and think that was cool. Whereas the live action remake, on top of just looking like a picture pop up book.
well, you know what? Hey, I'll say it's appropriate for a movie that was so obsessed with butts, it looked like ass.
Nice.
You and good night.
And
Anyways, so yes, I would say that the live action is. There's no reason to watch it. There's no message. They don't even know what message. If you talk to them,
and I think
they
what-
would say something, and then you'd go, "All right, we'll explain this," and they would have no idea. How
And
to
I think what
explain
we're
it.
seeing
it was just ass.
is- and this is the
So
irony.
bad. So bad.
is as we get the more recent live action remakes, we're seeing that the people who are running Disney, who are responsible for directing and writing these things, they don't have their Jiminy Cricket. They clearly don't have a sense of morality, or whatever sense of morality they have is not based on actual right and wrong.
Right.
It all ends up being about, oh, do what you feel is right, or how do I?
That's exactly
It's
it.
all about like again, we talked about this. It's all about like self-actualization and things like that. It's all like weird self-help stuff, but it's nothing actually concrete, nothing you can actually work off and say, no, this is right and this is wrong. And we talk about, okay, in real life, sometimes there are shades of gray.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, usually there's not. A lot of times, I would hazard to say, the majority of times when you're faced with a situation, one thing is clearly right, one thing is clearly wrong. And the clearly wrong one is the one where you say, oh, I really want to do that one. That's the clearly wrong one, right? And so to teach kids right from wrong, right? And again, we can talk about it was 1940s. You know, should we be teaching kids that playing pool is wrong? Whatever.
Yeah.
But you know, clear right from wrong. Whereas you know, the nowadays was, which I guess was supposed to be the message was, oh, Pinocchio was good the way he was. Right? You don't need to change. You're fine the way you are. You just need to realize how good you are. Right. And we've seen that with superheroes where, like, I think Captain Marvel is a great example of this, where it was like, oh, all she had to do was to realize how powerful she was to unlock her true potential. It's like, okay, but that's not character growth. It's like, oh, you know, we jokingly say, oh, the real journey was the friends we made along the way. Like, there wasn't actually any meaning to the hardship or the trials. And it's like, okay, if you don't have hardship and trials to overcome, you're not going to grow. That's how you grow, is by overcoming obstacles. And I think it comes back again to, you know, this movie was written during World War II, coming off the back of the First World War, coming off the back of the Great Depression. People who have been through hard times, seeing real hardships and real terrible things, and have, you know, they're just sturdier people all around. And we, who haven't, our generation, and your generation especially, who haven't seen, like, you're Gen Z, right?
Am I?
You're a Zoomer? What year were you born?
What
97.
Are you a wooden?
Oh, you're like borderline between millennial and Gen Z. Either way,
You made me feel so young. You're like, your generation.
I'm 1990. I'm like smack in the middle of millennial.
Okay, yeah.
It was funny because I'm an old soul, so I'll be like, these damn millennials. Then I'm like, wait, that's me. It's all these Zoomers. But the point is that these generations of our, you know, I'm including myself in this. The hardships we've experienced are, you know, largely internal,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
right? And you think about, you know, mental health crises and things like that. You know, there are real issues out there. But if you think about the people who went through actual world wars, actual death and destruction and devastation and starvation and things like that, did not have huge mental health crises. Mm-hmm. And you might argue like, oh, they just didn't have psychiatry. Yeah, they did. Psychiatry's been around for a while.
Yeah.
We, who are so self-obsessed, now do have all these mental health crises. And it's really interesting to see the movies that we put out, because the movies reflect the state of our culture. Our culture is so inward and self-actualizing, or whatever that means, which is, it's nonsense. It's nothing.
Yeah.
That we've just lost any sort of external stimuli to actually help us become people that we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's just like the idea that somebody else could speak into you. That's that like just the idea that he would tell Pinocchio that his dad, right, and his creator, like Geppetto, is saying, hey, you need to do this thing because that's what kids do, and I'm telling you what to do. That alone is like well, you can't just take that. Like, that's such an offensive message to be like, well, you can't really do that. And at the end, he's like having to apologize. He's like, you know what? I thought you were a real boy. I shouldn't have said, like it was my fault. You are who you are, and I need to realize that. And throughout the whole movie, you see this reflected. Pinocchio never makes a bad move. Yeah. And we see this in all of these main characters that Disney is pumping out with, like with Rey and Star Wars and all these other ones, where it's like their only problems are other people. And when they realize that they were just right all along, and that is just like, it's just such poison, honestly. Because if you sit there and dig inwardly and bring yourself to the end of yourself and be like, I am the only one that can tell myself anything, you're going to feel so alone. Like, you're going to feel so isolated, and you're going to be like, I can't trust anybody and nobody. And when in reality, you need people to look at you to point out the things that you can't see, because there's so much about yourself that you can't see.
And it is one of the reasons people can't handle criticism. When people get criticized, they're like, oh, and they find, you know, like this happens on YouTube all the time. Like, one YouTube channel will criticize another channel, and they'll be like, oh, we have to find a way to shut their channel down, to just silence them from speaking altogether, because we can't handle people showing us our own flaws. We can't deal with our own flaws because we can't have any.
Even to the point where it's like, you're showing my own flaws, that's dangerous.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
It's
to say that it's violent,
me.
Which is ridiculous. And I think, again, I don't delve too deeply into this stuff because it's so asinine. But I think the idea behind that is, well, first of all, it's just an attempt to shut down people's speech. But I think the idea behind it is that, like, oh, when you say these things, you make people go into depression and have suicidal thoughts and thoughts of self-harm. So that's the violence, is they might hurt themselves. You're not responsible ultimately for what other people do.
Right.
Okay. Unless you're saying, hey, you go hurt yourself.
Sure.
Then you're like clearly directly intending harm. If you're like, hey, I disagree with you, if your self-identity is so weak that someone disagreeing with you drives you to that, then you need to reevaluate what you're putting your stock in. Yeah. What your foundation is. Your foundation is sand, and it's washing away. That's a problem with you. That's your internal problem, and you have to deal with that, not to try to shut down other people.
And we can all sympathize with like the
Yeah,
the feeling.
absolutely.
We can all sympathize with like the feelings of one. Obviously, people can just be mean, and like
Yeah,
that's wrong.
yeah.
Nobody's supporting that and saying that that's good. Whether you would say that that's on the level of violence is something I disagree with. But I think we can all also agree with like the fact and sympathize with the thought and the feeling of somebody pointing out something wrong in you, and your initial thought and response being a defensive one.
Yeah.
And then later being like, you know what? They're probably right. I probably am a little bit too like selfish in these areas. I probably am, and that happens to me all the time. My instinct is to be defensive at first, and then I'm like, I'm so glad I have these friends or these people in my life that can kind of point these things out. Because if I was just on my own, if I kept everybody out, and if I just left myself to determine what is right and wrong, what's truth, and all this stuff just to me, I would be lost and very lonely.
Yeah.
And I would be a much worse person because of it. And but that's kind of the message of Pinocchio. Like, you can't do this on your own. You need people to pour into you. And the new message is just you're a wooden boy, and that's great.
And
that
that's
you're
great.
A wooden boy.
Yeah.
It's like,
why would you want to have real blood and real flesh and be a real useful human being?
Yeah.
I mean, why would you want that?
So, anyways, bit of a detour there at the end, but overall, live action bad.
Yeah.
I would ask you, Steve-O, I know you didn't get a chance to watch all of them. In hearing us talk, any loose thoughts on Pinocchio? Anything to add?
Or on Disney live action in general?
On life?
Life. No. I mean, no. I think it was pretty. I watched some of the teasers, some of the recaps and stuff like that. It was pretty bad. I think all the way through. So there's nothing like super passionate I can tell you to say. Like,
Yeah,
it was bad.
And I had someone ask me like, why are you watching all the live actions? Because you know they're going to be bad. Mm-hmm. But I think there is merit in, again, like we just talked about. There's merit in looking at bad art and saying, okay, what happened to get the art this bad? Especially with a remake, because a remake ostensibly should be, hey, here's a thing that people love. Let's do it in a way that either updates it visually, or maybe makes the story flow better, or it's supposed to hypothetically improve or extrapolate or innovate on what the original was. Well, and we see these cash grabs, clearly cash grabs.
I mean,
by
Disney they have a clear brand, right? I mean, and they don't shy away from playing that, right? And I think we're all like self-aware enough. You guys have been watching a bunch of these movies. What they're doing is consistent, whether we like it or agree with it or not.
Right.
Like, they have a clear brand and they are okay. Like, they're okay with 4 dudes in the studio ripping them apart.
They're making all that.
Right.
But
It doesn't matter.
The thing is,
So you
at
have to
this
take
point,
that with,
they're
like-
not.
They're not.
Right.
They're
It's
no longer
starting to
so I
come
think
back around a little
I think
bit.
we are at the end of. I said this.
They're
before.
losing billions
I
now.
think we are at the end of the Disney remake era. We are at the end of a Disney era. Whatever you want to call this era, we're reaching the end now.
Yeah.
Again, I say the end. It might be another 10 years before we see a major shift in Disney's paradigm.
Yeah, that could be true.
But because big companies generally take a long time to move. It's bureaucracy. It takes. I've been trying to get data for my dissertation for 6 months, and I'm still waiting because bureaucracy moves ponderously. It's frustrating. So I don't see Disney making any immediate changes. But the shareholders at this point have got to be asking. You look at the stock, and it's just a roller coaster, straight down.
Yeah, I will say, money is the thing that'll do
Money
it, though,
talks.
for these people.
Yeah.
And I'm confident of that, and the fact that over the last year, it's been like, it's to $1 billion now, right?
Yeah.
Like, they have lost.
Did you guys see a shift when they rehired the old CEO? Like, as you were watching the live remakes,
I was
did you
thinking
guys see
that too, but when was that?
think that was
so-
recent. I don't know if
that
we've
was
watched any of that.
That was so recent that
Was
it
it during
wouldn't
COVID? After COVID,
It was
right?
after COVID.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just recently. It was this
It was
year.
like this year.
Yeah.
No,
So
I
it
don't think
wouldn't
it was
have-
this
It was
year.
either this year. No, it was last year. But either way, it was so recent that all the movies. You got to imagine there's a 3 to 5 year cycle on
Yeah.
most movies, unless
Yeah.
they're like
I am confident.
But I don't think anything we've watched has been during the
Bob Iger.
the return
I
of
agree.
Bob Iger. But
Okay.
the thing is, I think Bob Iger was responsible for most of the stuff we're seeing at Disney. That was all him. Like, Chapek came in, and Chapek's was more of a money man anyways, and he kowtowed to the company line. But I think all the hiring decisions, getting these people who are making these creative decisions, that was all Iger.
Was that some of his
That was all Iger.
kind of
So this
philosophies?
is and so it's interesting that they brought him back because
That'd be something to watch,
of
though, in the
people-
next, like, if you guys continue doing this.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Hopefully we don't.
well, we actually talked about it last night.
We've
like,
only
what-
got 3 more movies.
So what's the next topic? I know, kind of forward thinking. After you get through these
it's a
3
good
movies.
question.
Movies that are fun to watch.
Yes. I already told Greg this last night, too.
Liam is like on the cusp of just existence. Like he is so close to like
you can see he's kind of flickering in and out right now.
Like-
he's
like-
looking a little transparent.
I know
The realization on a Sunday night that I have to watch 2 Pinocchio movies in the next
You gotta
48
spread them out,
hours.
man. You gotta spread them out.
as
can't.
much as we rag on Liam is genuinely one of my the people that makes me most happy to be around currently, and he has just been
Because
so
watching him suffer is
sad
just
lately.
so cathartic.
He's been so sad, and I am just happy for him.
It's affecting my life.
Me and Liam talked briefly. I haven't told Nathanael that we thought it might be cool to do like sports movies because there's a lot there, and we can have a lot of guests on who have just favorite sports movies.
I have one.
Moneyball.
Yeah,
I have
Moneyball.
one of my top 5 movies is a sports movie.
What is it?
Remember the Titans.
Yeah,
Great.
I love that movie.
Great.
So,
Rudy.
Sunshine.
Rudy,
Rudy's all
amazing.
time.
I see.
That's what I
I'm
would
not
put from.
like a huge sports ball guy. I'll watch. I understand the rules to everything except cricket and rugby, which let's
Kinda
be honest,
same, honestly.
I'm
Yeah,
not
it
watching a
does.
whole lot of it.
Yeah.
But like I
They're
can
not
go
real.
watch good football and get excited about good football,
Yeah.
which growing up in Charlotte and being a Panthers fan, you don't get to see a lot.
Not a lot of it.
Not a whole lot of that. We don't have a baseball team either. My dad's a Yankees fan, so a lot of times you'll see good Yankees baseball. He's also a Jets fan. So on Sunday, he's watching the Jets game. I'm in a different room, and I just hear him. Now he's a calm guy. He gets excited, but he doesn't get like angry a lot. And he's just yelling like, "What are you doing? Come on!" It's screaming.
It's a clown show.
Classic. I've never seen. He doesn't get salty. He was salty,
Yeah.
and me and my brother were like, "Oh boy, he needs to stop
Poor
watching."
guy, man.
But man,
He thought
he's
this was gonna be the
He's
year
like,
to-
"#1 defense, my ass." It was very entertaining for us, not so much for him. He was a very sad boy. They lost. The Yankees are out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
The Panthers
Morale is
everything's
low.
Morale is low, but yeah, I enjoy sports movies because again, sports movies tend not to be about the sport.
Correct. Yeah.
They
Right,
tend to be
yeah.
the sport is like the field.
It's like the vehicle in which
Lack
to
of a better
deliver the
analogy,
message.
it's the vehicle for a lot of really good. They're character driven, of
course.
and that's one of the things I think that works in sports movie favors is they are inherently character driven because the sport itself is usually fairly simple.
Right.
Right. There's not a whole lot of intrigue going on in baseball, except for when the Astros get the garbage cans out.
If you watch Ted Lasso, I mean, I know it's a show. I don't, you guys all seen Ted Lasso yet?
seen it.
A little bit. I've seen a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Awesome.
the messaging is just awesome, and it's like a tiny bit about soccer, like 10% or less.
It's like
right?
less almost.
It's
Yeah.
but like the messaging is so good. I mean, it's obviously funny.
very- it's just
I will say
fun.
the really
You feel
angry
good.
guy,
It's
the
a
guy who
great
gives
show.
me
Good
the guy who
watching.
gives me big who's the guy who's Bullet Tooth Tony in Snatch?
Oh,
Brad Pitt?
No. You know what I'm talking about? Vincent something or other. He wasn't like an actual football player, and he had like the record for the quickest red card during a regulation match.
That's awesome.
But the angry guy on Ted Lasso gives me major.
what's the
vibes.
chant? It's like
Roy Kent.
Roy Kent. He's there. He's there.
He's
He's
there.
Roy Kent.
Roy Kent.
Anyway, so in the near future, you might see us changing to sports movies. We'll definitely
We
be
watched
changing
all 6
away
Rockies and we
from-
loved all of them. So
Yeah.
those are
Amazing.
sports movies.
So in the near future, we will get through these 3 movies. We'll actually have a ranking episode where we
that's gonna be
talk
fun.
about the rankings thing. That should be a lot of fun.
Maybe
So
one
stay
time when
tuned.
we know Liam's not going to be there, Greg and I will rank all the movies, just all the movies we've watched. That'll be a long episode. That'll be a lot of fun.
All right,
so
Nathaniel, tell the people where they can find us.
All right, you can find us on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts. Dearly Debated, that's our audio version. Typically, that's this podcast is the 4D, the Dearly Debated deep dives, where we kind of dig into 2 movies, in this case, or 1 movie in the case of like Oppenheimer. But the Dearly Debated podcast is a little more broad, more like a topical show. And then, of course, you're watching us, Dearly Debated, on YouTube now.
If you haven't subscribed.
If you haven't subscribed, do it. Come on. What are you waiting for? We're right here.
Do
Subscribe.
it.
Do it. Do it now. Click that button now.
Now.
And then Greg and I run a channel called The Kitchen Chemist. We're in season 2, baby. It's been good. I've been
funny.
throwing in memes. It's been a lot of fun. We missed Saturday's episode just because the editing software I was using didn't work. I had to reinstall. But it's okay. Be a new episode tomorrow at noon. Noon tomorrow.
All right, and in 2 weeks,
You can sorry, I said that's where you can see us, but if you want to contact us, you can tweet at us at Dearly Debated, or sorry, X us. Dearly Debated. So dumb.
You know what Wolverine does?
X marks the spot. I don't know. It's not a tweet anymore. Like, what is it
Yeah.
supposed to be called? Like a
Sucks.
shuriken? It's a shuriken because it's pointy. I don't know.
Anyways.
I'm getting stuck on this. Anyways, you can also email us dearlydebated@gmail.com.
Yes. All right, and then in a couple weeks, this will be October 10th.
Cinderella.
We will be watching
Cinderella.
So tune in, watch
And
Cinderella.
we're watching the
Tune
because
in
I
live.
think there are multiple live action versions. We're watching the 2015 one directed
Lily
by Kenneth
James.
Branagh.
Lily James.
Lily James.
So until next time, enjoyed watching you guys. I mean, you enjoyed watching us. Why?
Oh, cut that out.
We will see you guys later.
Cheers.